19th Board of the Deschutes County Commissioners. And if you'll please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all for joining us today. We didn't have any meetings last week for a variety of things we were each doing as commissioners, so we've got a pretty full agenda today. We decided to hold the meeting here where it can be televised and recorded because there's kind of a lot of substantive things we're doing, so that's what brings us here. Usually our Monday meetings are upstairs. So we do, the first item on the agenda is citizen input. If there's anybody here that has citizen input on anything that's not on the agenda, this would be the time for to request or for to have you to speak. We usually fill out a blue form over here. If you haven't done it and want to speak, you can fill out the form afterwards. So I don't think we have any, so we'll go on. The next item is our consent agenda. I think in this we typically just vote on, but I think we're kind of interested in both these items. We're going to have Chris maybe come up and talk about the new snow blower and talk about what its needs are.
Yeah, and I support pulling both consent agenda items.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll second that motion.
Oh, yeah, just ignore.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we'll have a motion and a second,
sure.
and
Okay.
we'll approve.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
and I vote yes too.
Well, good morning.
Morning.
So within the consent agenda is a procurement item, kind of a mid-sized snow blower that we budgeted for this fiscal year. We've, with those past, two very large snow events we've had, and the one in 2017 and the one earlier this year, we've just encountered situations where snow is getting so high, and especially dense neighborhoods, that we're getting down to a lane or a lane and a half of travel just because you keep pushing the snow, no place for it to go, and so on. That coupled with the same type of problem on the 45 road, River Summit, near Mount Bachelor, and I think Commissioner Terrebonne got to witness that on a ride along one day.
Almost didn't make it up.
Yep. So it gets very narrow up there, and we contract with ODOT for them to snow blow some of that during winter operations, but a lot of times they can't make it in time, and so we've had need for this type of piece of equipment. It will allow us to clear out snow in those dense neighborhoods by hooking it to a front-end loader, blowing it into a dump truck if we have to, or directing it to other parts where we can dispose of it per se. Same on the 45 road. It allows us, in the middle of an event, to be mobile with it and get it up there and put it to use. So we used our kind of a joint procurement contract process on this, where all those snow blowers have been pre-bid and prices established, and so we selected the one we felt best matched our needs, along with the price and consideration of several snow blowers.
So my understanding is, the big difference is you can put it kind of directed into a truck. It's built for that. The other one, it's just made for throwing hundreds of yards off into
That's
the
correct.
distance.
Yeah.
So this is that medium-sized snow blower for that situation.
And it's one that, we're all in this together. The cities have problems. This is a piece of equipment that we can saddle up with an operator and put to use in urban areas as well. We share equipment, through the Central Oregon Public Works Partnership. And so I anticipate that, during these big events, we'll see this all over the county.
So what's the life expectancy of this piece of equipment?
That I can't answer specifically. I told Randy, since it was on the consent agenda, he could have the morning off, but I would expect, at least 15 years.
Yeah. Very maintainable.
Yeah.
What's the in the low snow years? What do we have much use for this, or is it pretty much for the big snow years?
It's for the big snow, and it's once you've it continues to accumulate.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a large snow blower that we use to clear the 45 or the Cascade Lakes Highway and Plano Lake Road annually. It's not one that we can mobilize during an event. It's one that's just used for opening up roads per se. So we could use this, to assist with that effort as well, and make it a little bit easier opening those two facilities up. But You know, like I was
It's
explaining.
kind of interesting that we've had the 17 and the 19 years, of events, but the last big one that I remember was 92, 93 that was that big, so it's a long way. I mean, there were some other big years in parts of the county, but not like those, so. Good. Well, sounds like we'll have use for it, though, I'm sure. Any further questions, or? Okay, so this will be then just a request to approve purchase of this.
So I'll move approval to purchase a RPM 220 snow blower in the amount of $152,181 from Northern Truck Equipment.
And I'll second the motion.
Any further discussion? Mr. DeBonne?
Yes.
Mr. Dare?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Thanks, Chris. Our next item on the consent agenda, we'll move, also the action items, was the consideration of order number 2019-38 in order to reopen the record related to the loop remand for the Thornburg Destination Resort tentative plan and site plan. Hi, Jacob.
Good morning. For the record, Jacob Ripper, Senior Planner. Were there questions about the order, or should I do an overview of where the project is?
Probably just
now?
kind of the big picture. So we're
Sure.
Yeah, 'cause-
coming back to a hearings officer and what's,
Sure.
We had recently, we had another request to, whether we were going to hear it or not. We didn't opt to hear it, so sounds like it's something that went on after that.
Exactly. So, yeah, the board declined to hear the appeal due to time constraints. So that made the hearings officer's decision the final county decision. That was appealed to LUBA, and LUBA remanded it on a pretty narrow topic. It has to do with water sources for mitigation. So since the board didn't hear the original appeal, it gets remanded back to the hearings officer. Now, the hearings officer, through this remand process, his decision could be appealed to the board again.
But who is it that's actually asking to reopen the record?
The applicant.
Okay.
Yeah, and through our procedures ordinance, it actually requires a board order to reopen the record, even though it's going to the hearings
And
officer.
I didn't really see any summary of, I guess I didn't think I read any summary, maybe I did, about pros and cons. Would there be any reason we wouldn't reopen the record?
I'm not aware of any reason why we wouldn't want to reopen the record. It allows some more process and provides parties to enter new testimony and evidence.
And that would help the hearings officer with the remand decision.
Exactly, yeah. And the new testimony and evidence is limited to the remand issue, so new issues can't be raised unless it's in response to this remand issue.
Okay. Further questions?
No, I just noticed this has been going on since 2005.
It's a very long project.
Yes. Long time.
great, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we just need a vote approving order number 2019-038.
I move we consider the order number 2019-038 in order to reopen the record related to the LUBA remand for the Thornburg Destination Resort tentative plan and site plan review.
And I'll second it.
Do you actually move to approve that order? Or to consider it?
To
Approve it, I think.
to approve it.
Yeah, so.
I second approval.
Okay.
Yeah, we were having to approve it, so, and any further discussion? Commissioner Dare?
Yes.
Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Thank you. Okay, our next item is the ODOT IGA US 20 Ward Hamby Road. And Chris and Bob Townsend will join us from ODOT.
Again, Commissioners, I think you all know Bob Townsend, local area manager with ODOT.
Next time I'll just say. Morning.
So the road department budgeted $500,000 within our capital improvement plan this year as the county portion for improvements to be constructed at the intersection of US 20 and then Ward Hamby east of Bend. Given the safety problems that have emerged within the past several years, intersection improvements at this location are extremely high priority for both ODOT and the county. We've had several fatalities at this intersection within the last several years. It's just caught on that fringe of the urban area, urban to rural transition, and then a lot of travelers that have chosen Ward Hamby to bypass some of the urban congestion. It's just created a safety situation with those two links. ODOT has identified funding in their ARTS program. However, that funding won't be available for several years. And so to get a jump start on planning for this project, again, which is the highest priority, ODOT has proposed an intergovernmental agreement where we take the $500,000 that we've budgeted this year and kind of front load the project with that. So we can get a head start on planning and design of improvements at the intersection until such time that the safety funding through ODOT's ARTS program becomes available and the project can move forward. The agreement stipulates that the county would put our dollars in first. ODOT would then be responsible for ultimate construction of the project. And then the IGA spells out all the typical things that you have when you have a partnership project of this nature in terms of working together and public process and things of that nature. So before you is an IGA, which kind of establishes the roles and responsibilities in the manner I just described. This is the first time you're seeing this IGA, although I think we talked about it in the budget process and maybe once before in May when Bob was here. I didn't anticipate this being a decision point for the board today. I thought it'd be good to introduce this for discussion and invite Bob to come answer questions. So not expecting a board motion on this, but if you are so inclined, it is in an approvable format, and you can approve it with a motion if you're so inclined. If not, we can bring it back on a future agenda.
So just one question, kind of logistics of $500,000 is planning dollars. There are going to be other improvements on county streets that are going to be responsibility of ODOT of kind of crediting these dollars, or are there other capital dollars that will be scheduled by the county in the future?
How it's structured in the IGA is that this would be the county's contribution, which would include, the full intersection improvements. So we would not anticipate at this time having additional county resources into this project. There will be a second phase to this IGA. Once the improvements have been identified, we'll come back with something a little more specific that the county and ODOT can agree to as the project moves into construction. But until such time, this is really the dollars just to get a head start on this project.
Or just to add to that, so ODOT does have $3.9 million dedicated in our 21-24 capital improvement program that's in the draft form right now, just going through the process of FHWA adoption. So as Chris mentioned, this $500,000 allows us to start design so that we can get construction in 21-22 versus if we were to wait till we have the money in 21 and start the design, it would be out until 2024. So our goal is with this front-loaded money is to shoot for a 2021 construction year, late 2021.
Any questions?
I believe I went through that intersection and there was a fatality maybe last year, the same day that I went through it. So it's really critical. 2 fatalities in the last 5 years, but a lot of accidents there. So the sooner we get going with that project, the better it is. And you're saying 21 late?
That's our goal right now if everything moves on this money. It's our #1 intersection in the region.
In our region.
From Columbia River to California border for safety improvements and due to the fatalities and other accidents.
So it's already in our capital improvement plan, kind of Gantt chart of the future. So, I mean, we're scheduled spending these dollars.
Correct. It's a part of the approved budget
Yeah.
for this year as well.
So I don't see any downside in approving it today is what I'm concluding.
Couple questions I have. So $500,000 sounds like a lot to design something. That's three people for a year, or what? I mean, how can it be that complicated, or what's involved with designing an intersection?
Yeah, so generally we're around 15 to 20% of total construction costs are design dollars, and so the improvements around $4 million. So $800,000 would be a normal percentage for preliminary engineering, but this money also includes advanced right-of-way purchase so that we can purchase right-of-way. One of the things that are challenging with these intersections is we have to prove that a roundabout or other intersection improvements would work. So you have to do a little background work before you can actually start with the final design. But the 500,000 includes right-of-way in this instance as well.
So are there 4 different property owners that you'd have to purchase from that intersection?
I'm not sure the exact ownership.
I believe minimum of 4. Yeah.
And, I mean, we've had presentations. Are you convinced that the roundabout's the way you're going to go, or is there,
We performed a safety audit in conjunction with the county and some other local stakeholders, and it lent itself towards the roundabout as the preferred alternative, but that doesn't mean it's finalized. We program it as an intersection improvement and let the science and engineering kind of dictate the improvement there, but more than likely it would be a roundabout.
I just have a question, because the Prineville roundabout, apparently it's going to be corrected now?
Correct.
Because I talked to a lot of truckers, and I drove through it with my horse trailer and, a little trailer. So has the engineering changed from whatever was put in Prineville? Because that didn't seem to really handle that situation at all.
Yeah, so the design standard changed after it was constructed to have these new types of curbs that we weren't using on the state system yet. And so since it was a new design feature approved, we figured since Tom McCall had just been constructed, we might as well go out there and bring it to the current standard. But it was designed to the appropriate standard at that time. You can imagine that roundabouts are shifting on state facilities as, we started with 1, 2, 3, 4, and now we're looking at ways to improve them. But at the time, it was built correctly.
Well, we know we have a speed issue, so roundabouts definitely do slow people down.
well, so, just kind of on an aside on this thing, because I know we're talking about this, and we're going to talk about Tumalo and all those other roads. As I've said in public meetings, people don't really like roundabouts if there's a lot of traffic on them. And so we'll see how it goes. But I'm real familiar with that intersection. I live on the east side of Bend and have for a long time. It's interesting when you say it met the standards at the time. What's interesting to me is this is obviously the new trend in road planning, that it seems like things like the Tom McCall roundabout could have been anticipated. So it seems like maybe they ought to do more planning before they do them, they fail, and then they redo them. And so I don't know who does that at the state. I'm just passing on my little local view of state skills. But, if this is the way we're going to do this stuff, and I've told you I live on a roundabout that is always difficult when there's a lot of traffic, and I anticipate that at this roundabout. It may be really safe because people will have to slow down, but we'll see how it works. Maybe it'll work great, but I think the one at Powell Butte does work well. There's seldom times when it seems to be backed up from what I can see at different times of day, but the more busy a place gets, the more difficult and more people dislike them.
Yeah, and there's a balance.
I don't know who the state thinks about those things, but
There's a balance to these single-lane roundabouts, or when do they become dual-lane roundabouts, like the Tumalo example that you mentioned. And just to go back on the
what will this be?
I think analysis right now shows single lane, but that's yet to be determined. We haven't gotten the details of that. But as for the Tom McCall one, so there was no failure. We weren't required to fix it. We just, with the change, it didn't make sense to have that one there. And as we design other ones with a different type of curb structure, since we had the contractor still under contract, we might as well go out and bring it. But there were no failures.
Well, I don't know what failure is.
Well, the truckers weren't happy.
Yeah, well, truckers.
They're the ones that are
Failure,
using
I don't know
it.
what that means, but it's, yeah.
Could you, so what is that design change? Is it the interior curb to the circle?
No, the exterior curb
The
in
outside
certain eyes is a flatter, more rolled edge.
Instead of a real sharp,
Correct.
so they can kind of roll up through it.
Correct. I mean, it's still not, it's designed so that they would never have to hit the curb, but it's just one of those aesthetic things where if someone makes the turn incorrectly, that they still have a little buffer.
Yep, okay. So it's the outside of the curb.
Yeah, I mean, it has its downsides. It's not as safe for pedestrians because there's not a harder, there it's a rolled curb where people can drive up on sidewalks, but it's a balance of these.
Got it.
The other question with regard to our participation, is that what you do in cities like Sisters? Does Sisters contribute some and then the state puts in the rest? Or how, is this kind of a formula-based approach to roundabouts where it's combined?
Yeah, I mean, as much as possible, we want to work with our local partners and stretch our dollars farther. This is an opportunity where it's of significance to the county and ODOT, so it meets our needs. So then we can save some of our arts money for other. I think the county has another arts project that would be receiving some of our funds. So it's just a way to stretch dollars. And we usually look for local partners to have skin in the game, if you will, so they're more supportive of the discussions.
Are you saying arts, like AA?
Yeah, it's
or-
all roads, transportation, safety. I apologize for the acronyms. We get
I
really,
used it first.
really, okay.
That's right.
Okay.
And
To that, Commissioner, I'll add that, it's pretty common to try to facilitate a partnership anytime you have a local government's transportation system connected to the state highway. That usually, the more successful projects have more partnership involved, and the Redmond reroute was kind of the most modern example of that. The city put in $12 million through downtown urban renewal funds to fund what was a $27 million initial project that eventually became a much longer alignment and a much more pricier project. But that's what gets these projects moving in our favor, is the local match and seed money.
is the arts money part of the big transportation bill, the 2000?
No, this has been an ongoing funding mechanism for, I think, over 15 years. It only deals in safety indexes, so it's based on crash data. It's actually the most straight lined of the formula about this is what gets what, and if it doesn't meet the cost benefit, then you can't use money for it. So it's a unique safety program.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Nope.
Seek a motion to, I think we can, I don't think we need to wait if we don't approve the IGA. Do you?
Yes,
Are
I'll
you
make a
okay moving forward today?
I'll make a motion approving ODOT IGA for US 20 Ward Hamby, document number 2019-649.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
I just have one question. Robert, did you say that the state has 3.9 million that's allocated from the state, and then we're going to do the 500,000? Correct. So it's actually going to cost 4.4 million, probably.
Yeah, we think our estimates are a little bit below that, but we just want to make sure have enough money programmed in case the right-of-way issues or other issues that we're not aware of.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay, Commissioner Bone?
Yes.
Commissioner Dare?
Yes.
Chair votes yes.
Here we go.
Thank you for coming and sharing that with us. Our next item is consideration of a grant application for 2019 illegal marijuana market enforcement. And I guess we have a whole team here. Commissioners. Morning. So what do you want to kind of we have a packet that was presented to us. We have an idea what you're requesting, but maybe you can kind of give us an overview, and for anybody here or anybody watching.
So this is a continuation of the grant that we applied for last year with the Criminal Justice Commission. That was only a one-year grant. And so it is now time to reapply for grant funds for marijuana enforcement. This grant that's coming up this time around is a 2-year grant. I can tell you that after our reporting to the state on this last grant, they've been very impressed with how Deschutes County, how the Deschutes County DA's office and the code team and the sheriff's office and Ben PD has handled this past grant. I think they were so impressed that they're excited for us to reapply again. I'm not saying that we're going to get everything that we asked for, but this time around it's a 2-year grant. We're asking for a total of approximately $700,000, so $350,000 per year. We may decide to revise that down. The Criminal Justice Commission is pretty upfront with the fact that not everything that we ask for would we get necessarily. We might, but we might not. So we'll either revise that number down or prioritize what we're asking for. And what we're actually specifically asking for is to continue with some of the things that we did last year, namely funding overtime for the detectives, and so that would be the Bend PD detective, it would be Detective Todd Kloss from the Sheriff's Office, and also the new detective from the Sheriff's Office that will join Detective Kloss. Continuing with our staffing for an analyst and also the management analyst. And what we want to add is, like I said, the overtime for the third detective. We want to add a contractor for financial analysis. Because what we learned last year was, as we got into investigating marijuana crimes, that there is a strong nexus to the finances, which are very complicated. Has to do with money laundering. It has to do with hiding and shuffling money. And so we need somebody that has expertise in looking at crimes like that to be able to analyze financial data and then advise the detectives on those investigations, as well as how to prosecute those cases in the DA's office. And so that was a piece that we learned. We didn't really anticipate that much, but we found out that it was super important. So we want to add that. And then one of the big components that we want to add is adding a website and a web portal for our citizens to submit complaints. And we find that that would probably be the best way to engage the public with trying to gather information about illegal marijuana activities. Along with that, we want to do community education. So we want to engage local businesses in the marijuana industry and other businesses like UPS, the small mom and pop postal connection type places, because from what we've learned, there's marijuana that is being sent across state lines through those avenues. So we want to engage all of those businesses that deal with parcels and with mail to try and find that marijuana that's headed out of state, and so that we can launch investigations into the people that are doing that. And then we want to take Kathleen from a 0.25 FTE to a 0.35 FTE, and that extra portion of the FTE, she'll focus on developing that web portal, developing the website, and also doing that outreach and education.
That is all correct.
There you go.
Why don't you give your name for the record, just so we...
Good morning, Mary Anderson, District Attorney's Office with District Attorney John Hummel. I'm here just to talk a little bit about the DA's office involvement and how that's changed. Initially, the analyst was with our office. We found that the work that the analyst was doing was primarily on the investigation side, and the smaller piece was the data collection because of our technical program manager doing most of the data work. So we moved that to the sheriff's office, which was the right decision, and she's doing great work with the detectives. This community education piece is focused primarily on the face-to-face communication with businesses, including, as Lieutenant Captain McMaster stated. I've known him since he was a deputy, so great to see him in his current position. What we've noticed is that we have these incidental contacts. So in addition to the mom and pop, mail one-stop places or UPS, we have commercial vehicles from companies like Avis and U-Haul that are being used to transport, and hearing incidental comments like, oh, this truck really smells like pot, which is a good indicator that maybe it's going somewhere it shouldn't be. So we need to educate those businesses, and the detectives, we need focused on their work on investigations. The community piece is, with the web portal, was the suggestion that evolved from the 911, or not the 911, but the hotline. We found that people are making calls. They're making calls to dispatch. They're making calls to code enforcement. They're making calls directly to law enforcement. But where to find the information on what's legal and what's illegal is really confusing. So we're trying to find a place where people can go through, and whether it's a decision tree, like what's your question about, use, grow, something else, get answers to their questions and then direct them who to report to, because we have so many different agencies involved. So we think that this will complement the work that the investigators are doing without adding to their work and detracting them from the investigations.
Commissioners, John Hummel, District Attorney. I want to thank Captain McMaster and Sheriff Nelson and Chief Porter, who have been wonderful to work with. And thank you for allowing us to go out for the first grant, and hope you support this renewal. I think Deschutes County is a model in the state for how to investigate these kind of large-scale illegal grow operations. We're not a model yet at having solved it completely. I mean, there's still more work to do, but we're a model in setting up these systems that are necessary to do that. I'm confident that if you approve this grant, at the end of this grant cycle, we'll have really good results to show you and the residents of Deschutes County, but also the policymakers in the state of Oregon, how it should be done. We're making progress, but I feel that we're just still in the laying the groundwork stage. This project, I'll call it, is impressive, and we're getting better every day. So I urge you to support this, and we're happy to answer any questions.
I have a few. What was the amount of the last grant? You know?
I do know, if you can give me just one moment.
Kind of-
I think it was approximately 136, and we were unable to use all of it because of the timing. It was supposed to be a one-year cycle, but the actual application was due after the start of the first year. So this year will allow us, with the 2-year cycle, to use more of those funds.
So this is a big step up, really. You're going to $200,000 more for 2 years, so.
Yes.
Okay. And then when you said the analyst was switched over to the sheriff's office, is that Danielle Martel, or
Correct.
she was in the DA's office previously, and so she's there? One of the questions I have is we've funded, or as the commissioners, we voted to fund one Todd Class last year as an additional sheriff's deputy with regard to marijuana investigations, and we had approved in our recent budget a second officer, which we're planning to do. Then the city has one, and we've got all this stuff going on. I really don't hear about much results. We had a report from Todd and whoever it was from our enforcement about things they'd done, but the only criminal case I can even come off the top of my head, and I read the paper pretty regularly, is the ones in Lapine, the big bust down there. And that actually tied into one of our land use decisions. So what else has been happening with have we found big grows? I mean, I just read about the $4 million of marijuana coming in from Mexico in a jalapeno truck yesterday. And so is that happening from all this activity, or is it just shutting down operations? Or I don't really have any sense of what the scope of what's happened in the last couple of years in the illegal side, with prosecution particularly.
So you're right about the big case in Lapine that also involved another place in Redmond, I believe. We went up to Hood River that was related to some of those cases as well. I don't have a list of everything to be able to relate to you, and I'm sure that, obviously I could have Detective Claus come in and give an accounting of every case that he's done. One of the things, there were 10 cases, I think, that he actually developed, or that the detectives developed, regarding the illegal use of marijuana that turned out to be fairly successful. But part of the thing that they learned over the course of the year is that we didn't anticipate that the cases would be as complex as they turned out to be because of the money that's involved in it. And so that slowed some of the process down as far as investigating cases. They thought they'd be able to turn more cases more quickly. And because of the complexities involved in it, it didn't turn out that way. And so they made a big impact. It was just more complex than what we initially anticipated. And so the number of cases that were solved doesn't look like a ton of cases on paper, but they actually did an enormous amount of work behind those cases.
But I'm kind of asking really what's been charged, has anything been prosecuted? Because I haven't heard of anything other than the one I mentioned. And I remember, the one with the Hood River and kind of a more broad scope, but I'm just,
We do have the final report, which includes also all the baseline data that we collected, because that was one of the questions. And that is now available. It's been submitted as part of our final grant reporting, so we can make that available to the board. But I can summarize from September 2018, when we were notified of the grant, to May of 2019, which is when we did the reporting for the grant. The first number is going to sound small, and then I'll tell you a little bit about those cases. 10 marijuana cases that were specific to the team were investigated. There were 11 search warrants, 15 arrests, 127 pounds of the butane honey oil, 1,981 pounds of marijuana seized, 11,099 marijuana plants seized, $143,051 in cash seized, and a little over 1.5 million in property seized. Now, this is all illegal marijuana activity. So
I think that's the report we got as commissioners from Todd and when they came in.
No, it was actually a huge number, though. It was like 15 million or something, his presentation. Don't you remember?
I do remember that.
It was like 15 or 16 million dollars.
So there are current investigations, and this is where the contract for the financial analyst came in. The scope of the out-of-state transport and the number of locations is being transported and the complexity of the financial piece of the investigation exceeded our current capabilities. So we worked with obtaining software for the analyst to use, but that's why we are requesting the contract amount for the financial analyst.
But, so again, though, has anybody been charged or prosecuted in the last 2 years?
There are current prosecutions. I can't tell you the number. It's a small number because the work that this team is doing has been focused on those large-scale cases. The investigation takes longer. So
Has
our
anybody been prosecuted? Has anybody gone to trial or
not
gone
to
jail
trial.
over anything?
There are cases pending.
Because it's, I'm asking in the bigger context because we're going to look at what we're doing with marijuana here. We've allotted our marijuana tax dollars to the sheriff's office to do this and to community development, et cetera, for enforcement, and we're doing, but I don't have the sense that there's, I don't know. I was kind of surprised when the grant came up that was run by the DA's office because it seems like most of the effort's been in the sheriff's office at this point. So I was trying to figure that out, and so I just kind of wanted to know what the future held with regard to prosecutions and cases that, I went to the U.S. Attorney's Marijuana Summit year before last. I'm going to go in a couple weeks in Portland, and they talk about all these transport issues, through the Postal Service, through the trucking, as a statewide, and the Attorney General from Idaho was there talking about it all showing up in his state and all these things. But I'm really interested in what's going on in our county, and have we kind of busted anybody shipping to Idaho? Have we busted, or I guess that's how I'm thinking about it with regard to what we're gaining from it, so.
So we're not quite a year in. We received the grant funds in September of last year. And what I can tell you is it's all coming our way. These investigations are not simple investigations. So we have pending prosecutions, and I apologize, I didn't look to see that number. We have dedicated a current prosecutor to working with this particular team on marijuana, and he has a background both at the federal and the state level. So he'll be advising them. We know that these cases are coming, and the reason we didn't request more funds for prosecution is because we know that these investigations are pending, and it's coming. It's probably coming in about a year, where we will be receiving these investigations for prosecution. They are taking much longer because of the scope. The breadth of the investigations is, I'm sure Deputy Kloss talked about this, but it's much larger than we anticipated, and more work than 2 people could do. Well, 3 with the analyst.
So when will this, a decision be made on this application? If you're able to present it, then is there a deadline? Is it October 1st or something, when the state would let us know?
So it's due on the 28th of August, and we don't know exactly what date they will notify us. Last year it was in September, so it was a pretty quick turnaround. I believe there were 6 applicants last year, and they're likely anticipating more applicants for this current grant cycle, especially with the 2-year cycle.
Captain McMaster, as you said, made the comment that they were happy with what we done. Who's they? Is that the Justice Commission or?
The Criminal Justice Commission, yes.
So is that under the AG's office? I don't actually know.
Yeah, I believe
Where it is.
it is under the Attorney General's office.
So they were glad with what we were accomplishing in our county.
Yes.
Questions, thoughts?
Just thoughts, it's good to be able to put those clear lines for folks that are in industry. It's a legal industry that is being abused in some areas. So our sheriff's office, and thank you very much for the prosecution efforts, want to be a partner at the state and the federal level to make sure people understand where those lines are. And they already understand this. They're just working a little bit aggressively outside there. So yeah, keeping the pressure on and getting the clarity in the legal market. It'll be interesting to see, some folks may be working in anticipation of federal changes, but that's not happened. So we've got an environment that we're working in, and it's good to, keep the pressure on for the folks that are trying to work outside the legal system.
So is this a competitive grant then that we're applying for? And how much money is the state putting up for this?
If I remember right, they've said they're going to commit $3 million this time around. And so that'll be divided up between, all the teams that apply.
Okay. But they don't have to choose you, though? I mean, if it's competitive.
That would be true, but I think that they're excited about what our potential is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Indication is, that's
Yeah.
good. Well, yeah, I'm very supportive.
So we're asking for more money then, that's good.
Yes.
Well, and we felt, I think, for all of us, we felt good with what we'd heard from, is it Detective Kloss? Yeah, and our CDD enforcement. I mean, we had a good report, so we understood what they were going at. The next step is prosecution. Things will be interesting to see what comes, because it's really, there's all this discussion by lots of people that we come in contact with about a lot of this, and we don't really know what's going on in a way in our communities or in areas, et cetera, so.
Well, Commissioner, if
Yeah.
I may, it's a good question, and it gets to, as Mary and the captain said, the complexity of these cases. We could have moved with 10 charges of possession of marijuana for the 10 cases that we're looking at. We could have filed those charges, but then we would have potentially missed somebody who was dealing drugs in Florida and New York and Ohio. So if we want to see if there's more to this case than a mere possession, we have to follow the money trail. We have to subpoena bank accounts. We have to get, trucking and shipping records. We need to talk to law enforcement in these other states where we think this person might be transporting their goods. That takes time to make these big cases. And without this team, we probably would have been going quick to a possession or illegal grow charges because we wouldn't have had the ability to do that. But we're going deeper into these cases to see if we can take down a big criminal syndicate. And so that's why you get a case that you could move quickly on an illegal grow, but if you think it's a syndicate, you might take 6 months to see if you can make it out. And if you can't make it out, well, sure, you still file on the illegal grow, which we would. But we think these cases we're working, at least some of them, might be much bigger than just to grow. So that's what we're looking at.
But once it, I guess that's kind of, I wonder if that's kind of what you were doing. And so, but at what point does it then become a federal issue, or is Florida, I mean, if it's a Florida, you know, that's the whole point to me, is people are growing here to sell it there.
Right.
So is it our case, or is it their case, or do you, you know, so do you end up having to decide which jurisdiction controls which part of it, and are you, it seems like that's what becomes very complicated. I get that.
Right.
But I think what we want to know is as residents of Deschutes County is really, are people growing things here to sell them there? And have those places been busted, and where were they? I mean, that's a, you know that with other stuff illegal, and at some point we'd like to know those things, and that, you know, I don't, maybe the next year we will, but
Well,
we've read about cases of the guy from Sweet Home that was packaging it in like yard monuments, and then there's somebody else putting them, you know, all these things people do. You hear about cases, and we hear reports from when we meet commissioners from other places, but we just haven't heard specifically about off of such and such a road, we had this, or these people that were these, and
Well, I hadn't heard anyone say that. I don't talk to the media enough before, but that's actually a first.
Well,
Maybe I should talk to the public more about my cases.
well,
But-
no, I just,
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm not really saying you don't talk to the media enough, I just want to know if that, at some point when we're going to learn what was going on in our
Yeah.
county. That's, I guess, what.
Right. And actually, I think it'd be a good
A lot of
opportunity.
back and forth from people saying, oh, it's no big deal, and no, well, about the time there are some large busts, maybe people will think it's a big deal. And
Yeah.
you've read about that in Colorado, where whole suburban neighborhoods have been bought up by people, you know, so I don't know what to scope is, I guess that's all.
Yeah, like until you mentioned when the cases go federal, and that's a big part of us working these cases up. You know, at the conclusion of our investigation on any case, if we think there is that federal connection, we have a great relationship with the FBI and U.S. Attorney Billy Williams, and we would be happy to, not only would we be happy to refer them cases, we've done that in the past, and we'll do that again. But you're right, at the end of all these investigations, we will announce, you know, to the public whether charges are filed and what the details are. And we can have private briefings with the three of you to give you more information than, you know, I'd be comfortable sharing in a forum like this.
Great.
Well, good discussion, it's good to.
Question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Just in terms of the mechanics, I think perhaps that some of the expenses listed on the last page there were included in the FY20 budget, perhaps for overtime or rent, but I don't know that the bulk of it was. So if the grant is awarded, then there'd have to be a budget adjustment coming back to program the revenue into a couple of different departments in order to move forward with the expense. Just confirming that.
Yeah, we can make that happen for sure.
Okay. I'm supportive of the grant application, so.
I'll move approval of a grant application to the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission for the 2019 illegal marijuana market enforcement.
I'll second it.
Okay. Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
Commissioner-
Oh, I have one more thing. Okay, so we're actually applying for 22% of that 3 million. So I surely hope that we get it, because I know you guys are trying to do your very best job. So let's, you know, we'll know, what, in September? That would be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I just,
Okay.
it's a big
Yep.
ask.
Any other comments from you? Okay. Commissioner Adair?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good
Thanks for explaining
discussion.
it, yeah.
Thank you for your analysis.
Okay, our next item is the consideration of ordinance 2019-14, a marijuana opt-out, and 2019-12, repeal of ordinance 2018-12.
Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Tanya Saltzman, Associate Planner. As was just stated, I'm here today to present for consideration 2 ordinances. Deliberations on the marijuana text amendments were held on August 7th, at which time the board directed staff to prepare 2 ordinances, which are included in your packets. The first is 2019-014, and that is the opt-out ordinance, which should be considered first, even though it's number 14 versus 12. And the second ordinance is 2019-012, which is the repeal of the marijuana text amendments, the repeal of ordinance 2018-012. So if the board would like to discuss those ordinances, first to the opt-out.
So
Welcome any questions or?
Yeah, so I guess I want to discuss a little bit more with the commission. I made the comment during the last meeting that I thought we should continue and with our original amended ordinance. And I've had a chance to think about that a little more. I want to, again, make the case for that. I actually thought we were going to also have that option in front of us too, as to allow those to pass. Because to me, to get our real job here at the current level of what the state has authorized us to do was to regulate, to set up reasonable time, place, and manner regulations. And then I was going through the record, and there was a letter back in 2016 from the commissioners at that time, including Commissioner DeBone, saying that we would, during our adoption of the marijuana land use ordinance, it would recognize the new regulatory program would need to be evaluated and updated to determine if it's working as intended to support the emerging industry and preserve the high quality of life for rural residents, and to address changing circumstances, interpretive matters, amendments to state law. And then it says to update the program. And I always thought that was a kind of a commitment that was made to the legislature. It was also made to the voters to look at that. And so from my opinion, we did that, and I went back through the change regulations, and I think they're all very defensible. There's a couple things I might change given the impact we've had, but it just seems to me that the opting out is really just saying we're going to put the decision to the voters next November, but we really don't know what the voters will do in next November. And we spent a lot of time trying to improve the regulations, and I was involved, and Commissioner DeBone, you were involved in a lot of interpretations for several years. And so I go through the regulations we came up with, and I really would like to move approval of the regulations as made, but discuss a couple of possible amendments that seemed like they made some sense. The criticisms made some sense. But I think otherwise we're going to be back if we don't pass, if the opt-out isn't affirmed by the voters, which is really the goal of that, is to allow the county to vote on it, then we're back to continuing to interpret the old regulations, which we had decided after a lot of consideration should be improved. And we did a lot of improvements, I think. We clarified things that made sense to us. I mean, there were tests that we'd had, and I can go through those that we'd had in the old that didn't work very well. Like when we said that access was only required for over 5,000 square foot grows. Well, really, it's all grows should have access proof. That's not a big test or whatever, but it was kind of a glitch. There was ones about 7 o'clock to 7 o'clock really isn't a good times, because sometimes it's dark at 7 o'clock, sometimes it's sunny at 7 o'clock. So, so in the summer you could have your lights on longer, in the winter you'd have them on shorter. But I just thought there was a lot of practical changes in this, and I think that it was just in Colorado for several days and did some research there about what the regulations were, and this whole attack by the Farm Bureau that we're not adopting reasonable regulations. If you broaden out the scope beyond our little county and what some growers here don't like, Colorado has a whole diversity of regulations, and I don't think they all have been tested for reasonableness of them. But I think that our tests our requirements aren't unreasonable. Odor control is not unreasonable, and telling us what the system, noise control, the way we've laid out isn't unreasonable. The setbacks aren't unreasonable. So I'm not afraid really to have LUBA decide that, or even the legislature attack that, and they may try to change it so we don't have this. But that would be good to know that they feel that way before we vote, because if the legislature changes it and says, well, you can't have reasonable regulations in this next session, then we'd want to maybe change people's votes on the opt-out. Or if the the LUBA tells us, oh, this isn't reasonable, but this is, well, then voters will know, we'll be in a testing, but to just abandon all this effort that, we've had a couple editorials I read, talking about wasting the county's money. We spent a lot of time trying to make those clear and to not adopt those regulations. We could still opt out at that point, but I just think that was really the body of work that we did for a year. And I know a lot of effort was put into it, so I just thought I'd bring it up again before we get to the other, to see if there's any, either of you have any other thoughts about that or where you are.
So I'm pretty clear that if we're going to opt out, I would rather pull these back and deal with them in another day, just to have less moving parts. And this is exactly the words I used before. I just think, the voters get clarity on this, remove this layer of discussion about, well, they had some regulations and now they put more unreasonable or more reasonable, and this is exactly where we're at. So I just conclude separate, different than you. Pulling these back, reducing the moving parts, getting clear.
I get your point, but what's moving about it? I mean, I don't understand what you mean by that.
Well, inciting Farm Bureau and growers that are going to be able to look at, they put these more regulations in place, which is going to, possibly incite some folks in Salem and the majority party saying, well, why are they doing that, and asking for the vote of the people. So that's kind of the path I go, just the logic of it.
Well, I guess, so just to respond to that, because this is kind of deliberation discussion. So here's a statement from the Oregon Farm Bureau about Senate Bill 365, and that's where they attacked our STCs. But also it attacks our regulations, and it says, perhaps the most troubling regulation enacted by Deschutes County are the recent regulations enacted around how marijuana is allowed to be grown in the county, including owner setbacks, odor mitigation plans, water quality plans, buffered instances, and other regulations we believe far exceed the scope of what the legislature intended when it authorized time, place, and manner regulations for the marijuana production. And then it says the bill was created for a very limited carve-out of Oregon's right to farm. So, I mean, you look at our odor control now that we've suggested, it's not really particularly different than what we've been interpreting it to be in the poor wording of the original ordinance. So they're criticizing what we're doing anyway. So I don't understand. I mean, they're already, they want us to not, and so if you're being supportive of the county residents, I mean, they're going to be attacking us no matter what we're doing, it seems like, and any controls. But that isn't going to change by us not, whether we put the regulations in or not. They were attacking the old ones too. I mean, and so what? And we haven't really changed very much of this. I mean, water quality plans. What water quality plan do we have? We don't have a water quality plan. I mean, so I guess I look at it as if we're choosing a choice to try to protect those people that livability in the county is a bigger factor. Having the regulations sitting there doesn't bother me, and I don't know that it hurts the vote. I mean, in terms of, or changes the vote, really. So that's just my view.
Well, we've had some 2-to-1 votes on, some of the approvals that have gone through. The relationship with the folks that want to be growers in a well-regulated industry out in the sunlight has changed. Since I started this process, being in office from 5 years ago. So, yeah, it's just a different trajectory that I think you and I would be on. And as I say, we've concluded.
What do you mean by that? I mean, what do you mean
the relationship with the folks that do the application process. I'm an enthusiast, and I'm referring to some of the people we see that come in the door, enthusiastic, want to be part of this system, don't mind the Oregon OLCC rules, want to work within the regulations of Deschutes County, and I've voted different than the majority of the board on some of those applications.
most of them?
So I'm just, I was intending on having, support and reasonable is always the hard thing here, but support for those folks that wanted to work in this regulated system, and we've seen some of those denials. So, as I say, I'm just seeing it at a whole different level maybe of control, where I'd rather back off from these regulations, get the clarity from the voters, and then if we need, and there's items in there that I want, just like we were talking about, Redmond wanted the UGB, MUA 10 wasn't applied for. Those are very specific items that I yearn for, but I think we can get that back. It's a package. We're going to put that package on the shelf. We're going to withdraw it from now, and we have that body of work that could be brought out at the decision, after the decision of a vote. So,
Do you think there's any growers that actually like any of the regulations? Have you heard any growers that have said, yeah, I can live with the old regulations, or they're great? Or because I really haven't ever heard that. I just heard all regulations are bad.
Well, we've had applicants in front of us saying, this, now that there's a path, I want to go down that path. So they don't say the words, I like these regulations, but they want clarity, so they know what path to go down and what's going to be legally authorized in Deschutes County.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, who knows what our legislators are going to do this next spring. They didn't like our original regulations, the time, place, and manner ones, and I know they tried to get those removed this year, and somehow we were successful in not having that happen. But I do believe that, per advice from our legal staff 2 weeks ago, they were saying that we're really in a position today where we don't have to go with our text amendments. I think staying with our original regulations, and if we have a legislative issue happen in the spring, then we can definitely bring our text amendments back earlier than after the vote. But at this current time, I don't feel like we need to do them. I don't think, if the legislature, attacks our time, place, and manner, the original ones, then we know we're in trouble and that we need to, really get into our text amendments. And, we do live in Deschutes County, and we are never, we're never weary of sometimes battling. And when they made this a farm crop, I think it made it a different situation than the state of Colorado, where they're dealing with their own issues. And so I feel like we're okay today in not going ahead with the text amendments.
Good discussion.
Well, if we have to bring them back earlier than November, we do.
Why would we have to bring them back earlier than?
What if the state legislature gets rid of all of our regulations? Wouldn't we want to fight that?
How would you
The
fight
outcome of the short
Huh?
session.
How would you fight that?
I don't know. I figured, how would we fight it, Dave?
Well,
In court.
In court.
there
Yes.
you go.
Adam, do you have any clarity on that? What if the state legislators next spring said, oh, Deschutes County can't have the original regulations?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, if the commission, if the legislatures took away the authority to have the reasonable TPM regulations, I would assume that would require some kind of text amendment to our code, and then, depending on the nature of that legislation, would probably dictate how much of an amendment we would have to do. And if we didn't do an amendment, then it would likely be that somebody else would take us to court and we would be defending an action.
One of the reasons I think it's good to keep pushing with our regulations is that I don't mind going to court to let courts define what's reasonable. Because I think reasonable, we have a lot of arguments that these are not particularly unreasonable regulations. They're, other states do it, other counties do it in other states. Like the density issue, we decided we were going to have a space between grows. They do that with other things. They do that with stores in cities. The store dispensaries have to be separated. So I think there's lots of ways that we would defend those. And if for some reason we're struck down, that would be good to know. It may encourage people to just want to opt out. If we're upheld, then we can opt out also. But my concern is, we're basically stopping everything for this period of time, and we've done all this work. So I guess I felt like we're I felt I had a commitment to the people we told we'd look at the regulations and change them as needed. And we did that, and I feel like we should follow through with that, so. But it doesn't look like I have another vote on that, so I guess we'll move on to the opt-out.
So an opt-out discussion is possible, I'm supportive, and if there's three of us, so the discussion would be around by emergency. I would conclude that, doing it by emergency just gives clarity that the date is now instead of 90 days from now.
I would agree with that. I'm for the opt-out. Which is really not an opt-out, it's just a moratorium till the vote
Yeah.
next November.
So the terminology is defined by the state legislature, opting out of allowing land use applications and sending it to the vote of the people.
So I've always been in favor of a popular vote on this matter. I thought it was clear that the rural voters of Deschutes County had voted against the original marijuana Measure 91. All of the precincts of the county had voted it down. It's become more clear since then that the vast majority of the people that live in the rural portions of Deschutes County are not happy with the industry really, or the applications. We hear from it a lot. We really haven't stopped the industry. We've approved 49 grows in the county, 19 of which have been approved by the OLCC. So people that say that we're stopping the industry, that's not exactly true. To me, it's kind of, well, we're doing a moratorium. So I'm in favor of an opt-out vote. I wish it was sooner than next November, because I think there is this issue of lost revenues. I'm not particularly happy about the lost revenues that we will lose from the being opted out, but I would approve the opt-out.
By emergency?
I guess the one thing to be gained if we didn't do it by an emergency would be is that when would it take effect if we didn't do it by emergency?
It would be 90 days after the second reading.
Which would be
Which would be
when?
2 weeks out. The day after Labor Day would be that's the 3rd.
September 3rd.
September 3rd, September, yeah. That would be the day of the second reading and the signing, so it would be 90 days from that. Correct?
Could be close to the end of the year.
And what would happen if we didn't do it by an emergency? That would mean people could operate, if they wanted to apply, they could operate for,
Just
what's the
application.
difference?
Yes, technically, applicants can submit applications during that 90-day period, and then which regulations they would be applying under would be dictated by your decision on the second ordinance in front of you this morning.
So, yeah, it would give another 90 days plus 2 weeks for applications.
And so and if we do a September, what is it, second reading, then it would take effect like October 3rd?
December 30th.
It would be 90 days from the 3rd.
December
If
3rd.
it was done by, I'm asking about in the case of an emergency.
Oh,
Would it be October 3rd?
It could be that very day, right?
If you adopted it by emergency, it would be effective today.
today.
Could be.
Oh.
It could be effective as early as today or any period of time less than 90 days that the board determined. To do anything less than 90 days, it has to be via emergency. So it could be as soon as today or any date within that range of dates. As drafted, it's contemplating being effective immediately.
Okay, so I'd be in support of that.
Well, with that, I'll move ordinance number 2019-0, or first reading, I guess, of ordinance 2019-014, an ordinance prohibiting the establishment of certain marijuana businesses in unincorporated Deschutes County, refer to the electors, and declare an emergency.
Commissioners, you could actually, if it's going to go by emergency, be first and second reading.
Okay. That a motion for first and second reading then.
I'll second that.
Any further questions or discussion?
Has anyone done any research on the fees? Because we already have the existing marijuana business. Will we no longer be eligible then for the state revenue?
The way that'll work is Mr. Anderson will get a report or documentation from the state in a few months, and when he fills it out, indicating the county's opted out effective whatever date, we'll see where the state pivots on that, and if they withhold some or all those revenues, we'll certainly be talking to the board in executive session about whether to pursue litigation.
So the one that goes to Minister Anderson?
Yes.
Minister Anderson.
Yeah.
Commissioners, it works on a quarterly basis. So just last week, I was asked to certify that for the period April 1st to June 30th, that the board had, whether the board had taken any action to opt out, which I answered in the negative. So in about 2 to 3 months, I'll get another one for the period July 1st to September 30th, asking the same question. And of course, my answer will be different then. And then, so in that fall time frame, we will know what the state's reaction will be. And the action today is opting out of 2 categories of marijuana regulation. There are several other categories that you're not opting out of. I don't know if that will make a difference or not in the eyes of the state. I think this is a new situation for the state as well. I don't know that they've encountered what's occurring now in Deschutes County, so we will see what their response will be and can then act accordingly.
Okay, so any further discussion? So which version did you
First one.
move approval of?
And I have a non-draft version here for the actual signatures that I'll present to you.
Okay. So any further discussion, Commissioner Dare?
No.
So the vote, we'll take the vote on ordinance number 2019-014. Commissioner Bone?
Yes.
Commissioner Dare?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. And so that,
So now motion for adoption?
Motion for adoption and with the reading of the title.
Or, so he needs to read it right now?
Yes, the title needs to be read, and then you can move adoption.
okay.
This will be first and second reading.
So this is first, do I read it twice then?
You just indicate it's first and second reading.
Okay, first and second reading of an ordinance prohibiting first and second reading of an ordinance by title only, an ordinance prohibiting the establishment of certain marijuana businesses within unincorporated Deschutes County, referral to the electors, and declaring an emergency. And then seek a motion to approve that ordinance.
I move to approve ordinance number 2019-014,
Actually, adoption.
the adoption.
Yeah, adoption, not approval.
And I'll second the adoption.
Any further discussion? Commissioner Adair,
Yes.
Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Okay, so then we go on the second ordinance is ordinance repealing ordinance number 2018-012 and declaring an emergency. All right?
An emergency if the commissioner.
Or not.
If there's, yeah.
Or not.
We have both
Okay, yeah.
Well, there's 2 options, so, okay. So any discussion on this or deliberations on this?
So it would just be querying if you would support an emergency at this point. Because I will support
Well-
repealing.
Yeah. I don't really support repealing them, so.
Yeah, so,
Be a 2-1 vote on that, so then it wouldn't be by emergency, right?
Correct.
But that doesn't really affect specifically anything because nobody well, if we repealed them, then, now we have some that have been argued under the old, or the new regulations, right?
Isn't there just one?
Just one case, and so by repealing them, does that change the standard in that case?
That case, from day one, we've processed, looking at both the original marijuana regulations and the new regulations, because there was uncertainty at best on which regulations applied pending the withdrawal. So I don't think it is going to necessarily be outcome determinative for that case. they did technically apply when these, the new regulations were effective. And so I believe they are still arguably effective for that application. But as I noted, we processed this all along considering both sets to cover all bases in case something like this occurred.
Is that one we haven't made a decision on, or we did?
That is correct. You have not made a decision. It still is in the open record period. So when it comes back for deliberations, we'll certainly have some clarity on if we're going to maintain both sets of findings or just go with one finding. We can sort all that out with that one single application.
Okay, so then we would be, so the motion then would be for what? First reading of ordinance 2019-012 without the emergency order. Okay, so does someone want to make that motion?
I will make the motion to adopt ordinance number 2019-012, repealing Deschutes County ordinance number 2018-012.
By title only?
By title only.
So I think it's a motion approving reading of it, isn't that right? Or approving the,
First reading.
so it needs to be a motion approving first reading.
Okay, I make a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2019-012.
I'll second that.
By title only?
By title only.
I'll second it.
It's complicated. Okay, further discussion? Commissioner Dare?
Yes.
Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
Now, if I'm going to vote against the adoption of this, does it matter how I vote on the reading of it?
Well, they're two separate issues, so certainly if you're not in favor of this course of action, probably should be a 2-1, the vote should reflect that.
So chair votes no. No. But now we do the first reading, right?
By title only.
So I'll do a first reading and title only of an ordinance repealing Deschutes County ordinance number 2018-012 and declaring,
This is not declaring an emergency. And this will be back for second reading the day after Labor Day.
ordinance number 2018. Okay, now I'd seek a motion approving that ordinance.
No, second reading is two.
Yeah, second reading, and then there'll be the approval on the day
2 weeks
after
from
Labor
now.
Day.
Oh, we don't do that approval day.
We're
Okay,
done for
so
today.
we're done for today. Okay, so I think that concludes all our business with regard to the opt-out and repeal of the text amendments. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank
Right.
you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for all that joined us on that. We're moving on to the Terrebonne sewer feasibility study and discussion.
Shall I begin? Nick Lelak, Deschutes County Community Development Director, joined by Todd Cleveland, our Environmental Soils Specialist Supervisor, and Chris Doty, our Road Department Director. Commissioners, we were asked to provide a summary of the 1999 Terrebonne Sewer Feasibility Study and offer some perspectives. Reasons, if known, the study was not initiated and/or implemented. Options to engage the public to determine community support to initiate a new or updated study. So we will summarize those. We'll also offer some perspectives on what is currently occurring in Terrebonne regarding wastewater systems. Todd can talk about briefly our septic systems. We have a packet of information for you, and it's available online. It includes the study. It includes a scope of work and a fee estimate submitted by Parametrics to study this issue. Chris Doty submitted a memorandum that he will summarize in just a few moments, and then there's a map of vacant lands, existing private sewer districts, and the Terrebonne Water District boundary. Just to kick it off, I'll provide a high-level overview and then turn it over to Chris and Todd, and then I'll wrap it up in just a few moments. But we're here because, and I think that's important to begin with, because a couple of Terrebonne residents approached Deschutes County about an interest in sponsoring an update of the 1999 Terrebonne Sewer District study. That study was commissioned initially by the Terrebonne Water District, and they had a grant from the state, and so they studied the issue at a large scale. As our comprehensive plan and our Terrebonne community plan indicate, and conversations we've had with the Terrebonne Water District and others in the region, it was not initiated and or implemented at the time, really due to two factors. One, a lack of public support at the time, and two, due to cost being a very, very significant factor. So we know that it wasn't initiated, we know that it wasn't implemented, and I do think there's a lot of really interesting information, and Chris has spent time, as we all have, looking through the 1999 study to really understand what it was proposing, and I think it'll be beneficial to the board for Chris to highlight what's in the study and our collective perspectives from that. And as you know, if you don't say it, I will, that Chris is the former Public Works Director for the City of Redmond, so certainly extensive experience and specialty in sewer systems, sewer district master planning, as well as northern Deschutes County. So probably nobody better to.
It might be a little overstated. It was the least favorite part of my job. How's that? So yeah, Nick asked that I, help out with this, and just given, prior experience in dealing with the wastewater collections and treatment for the city of Redmond. By no means am I an expert, however, but I did have a chance to look at the study. Just one thing right off the top, this is a snapshot in time. This was under the regulatory environment that was in place in 1999. This could have been feasible. It was just basically that, a snapshot in time. 20 years have passed. Regulations haven't gotten haven't decreased in scope and scale and complexity, as you can imagine, during that time. But I think there's things that you can look at this study and say, yes, this is probably pertinent to what you would see in an updated study today. Other things that I think we'd want to revisit for the community's sake. First of all, the way the study was done was kind of interesting. They picked a utility rate, a monthly rate that they felt would be supportable, fairly high but reasonable rate, and then they assumed a certain cost that would occur for each homeowner or each service, such that you would have to install a new septic tank and a new pumping system for each lot and service. And so they took those two factors and did their financial modeling off of that, and basically backed into what percentage you would need grant funding to support construction of the system. And so they didn't start out with figuring out how much it would cost, then figuring out the rate. They figured out the rate first based on what could reasonably supported, and then figured out how much that cost would need to be subsidized in order for this to be a feasible project, which includes the maintenance and operation of the system in addition to the capital cost. The rate at the time they assumed was $40 a month. $1999, that equates to $60, $65 today. The $4,000 per month that they assumed in 1999 for the cost of a new septic tank and a pumping system based on their recommendation of a step system would be probably between $7,000 and $8,000 today, just based on cost indices, consumer price index, construction cost index, things of that nature.
While you're talking about this, one thing I was trying to figure out, there was documents here, the number of residences, is that, so when you use a number like $60 a month, is that times, like it's something like 600 residences or 700 residences, is that what you were, it seemed like that's what they were working with in this study.
The number. In a typical rate structure, you'd have a residential rate, and then you'd have a commercial rate based on higher loadings and things of that nature. But for the most part, this
the residential rate, or $65 would be a residential rate.
That's what it would be in today's dollars. Yeah. So wastewater system has three primary components: the collections piece, how you get the stuff to the ultimately the place where it gets treated, which is the second part of a wastewater system. The treatment component, and then disposal. You're left with basically a lot of effluent or treated water when it's all said and done. And you need to get rid of it somehow. This study recommended a step system. That's a system where you maintain your septic tank, and all of its functionality in terms of that, maintaining the solids and the process that takes place within the septic tank. And then you're basically, the effluent, what's coming off that, you're designing a system to basically provide what amounts to the function of the drain field. And that's where this would be piped someplace and treated and then disposed of. So you still keep the septic tank, you have a pump attached to it, and it's a common system, I think, for smaller areas and just for retrofit situations and for areas where you have difficulty in getting gravity flow. And certainly the amount of rock and everything in Terrebonne area, as we've been told by the community members over the last several months, I think that recommendation would probably still remain in any sort of study moving forward.
So this is a system where there's no big sewer lines going through neighborhoods. It's just one by one.
You would have a sewer line, but it would be almost like a water line from the standpoint of you're pumping into it, and it's a low pressure system. And so each individual pump is contributing to that pressurization and moving the effluent to its ultimate location.
Okay, so no gravity at all in the system? Or...
It wouldn't be, there's gravity for gravity's sake, but not designed gravity.
And does that lessen then the whole design construction costs?
It does.
Yeah, because the individual systems,
Yeah, absolutely. There are parts in Redmond that are 20 to 25 feet deep, large diameter gravity lines. They're super expensive to construct. So
yeah, Bend is that way too.
The study recommended two means of treatment and disposal. The first, and kind of I think what they'd hoped to would be Plan A, would be to contract with the city of Redmond and pump the effluent to the city's wastewater treatment plant, where it would be treated and disposed of, through the city's process. The second option was a lagoon system. So kind of an old school type system of lagoons. I think you're probably familiar with what those look like and whatnot. But didn't get, I think, into too much specificity as to where it would be and how it would function per se, but just use generalized costs on, this is how the system would work and the amount of treatment that would happen and then irrigation that would take place with the effluent after it had run through the system. I think you could probably assume to some degree that, I think, conversations were had, with the city back in the late 90s. I don't know if the city would be interested today in participating in something like this. My spidey senses tell me no. It's just they've got too much into their wastewater treatment plant. There's just a lot of risk in taking on additional effluent. This isn't, it can be septic to some degree. And, I want to say just with the amount of growth, they'd be hard pressed to want to use any of their precious system capacity to serve, a community like this. So that option is probably not as viable today as it was back then, but it certainly would be worth a conversation and exploring that a little bit. So that would leave it with a lagoon system really is the only other option. As we've talked internally, Todd, Nick, and myself after reviewing this, we think that not just in any sort of update, we'd want to look at some clustered systems. So you're dealing with small blocks per se instead of a large community system. Just because the growth that has happened in Terrebonne has happened through development of those small systems for individual subdivisions, Angus Acres, and then Terrebonne Estates have developed utilizing these systems. And, I think that's definitely worth exploring in any sort of update. And that's what we'd like to see in an update. Let's see.
Well, 24% of Terrebonne is undeveloped lots currently, so there's got to be some land there.
Correct. Yeah. So it would be ideal to explore, small systems instead of a large system that just tears up the town. And to one more point I brought up in the memo, the timing of this conversation is interesting. We're about to put a lot of pavement down in Terrebonne. And, you know, I think you may hear from community members at the hearing next week. You know, you're talking about, you know, sewer system, you know, hey, we've got this big project. The timing is off. And so there's, you know, this is a very, you know, the Highway 97 project's very mature. It's going to go to construction here pretty soon. This is a very, this conversation is in its infancy. You know, if it's a whole-scale system that gets built in Terrebonne, certainly, you know, roads will be impacted. The thing I think that we've got going for us here is that, in this conversation at least, is that the clustered system, you know, would have a much lesser impact to transportation infrastructure, and, you know, if that's a viable alternative. Or the step system in general, you know, is a little less impactful in terms of tearing up roads because you don't have those deep gravity trenches necessary. So a couple talking points to make us feel a little bit better about the timing being off, but that's the reality of it. The 97 project is way ahead of anything that could be done here, infrastructure that could be put in place, dry lines, what have you, probably. And so they're two separate entities right now.
You're saying essentially we're too late to get pipes in before the ODOT project goes forward.
Yeah, I think it you know, the degree of certainty that you need with, especially with wastewater systems, is such that, you know, we could throw conduit in here and there to hopefully, you know, get it right. But I think by the time the 97 project goes, you know, we're not going to know what to do here in Terrebonne in terms of the system. Since we're just, you know, starting up this conversation 20 years later.
Questions?
And at some level, so land use in the urban unincorporated community. So that's something that I didn't understand. I mean, the options are out there. There's no limiting what can be done, and it's basically the perimeter of the water district boundaries is the area we were talking about here. Is that correct?
Yes, Commissioner, that is correct. For example, in most rural areas, a goal, not an exception, which is facilities, the statewide planning goal facilities, limits the availability of sewer or connections, et cetera, but that's not the case in unincorporated communities like Terrebonne. This is an option. The real limiting factors Todd can mention are going to be the geology of this area, the lot sizes, et cetera, that Todd experiences.
It was just such, you know, the Goal 11 exception in the rural county has always been such a big daunting thing, but we're just not even dealing with that here. So that was just interesting to learn. I learned that recently.
Right.
So then, yeah, we do have kind of the geology of the area.
The concerns are, I mean, a lot of these homes have very old septic systems. Some of the commercial areas have old systems. They're kind of, the records are pretty minimal. They're scattered around. Concerns would be that as they fail, we may not be able to repair them with an individual on-site system. That includes the commercial areas because there's very shallow to rock, very small lot sizes. So there's not enough area to put a drain field in and treatment unit. Those are the concerns, and some of the undeveloped properties are very small, and there's not sufficient area. There may be room to put a septic system, but you can't put a house and a septic system on there. So that's why they're still vacant.
One or the other.
So it's interesting that you might have an approved septic approval on a property, but no one can actually fit a house and a septic system on the property. That's how small some of these properties are. So very shallow to rock. Some of these properties can't even be approved. We do, if you look at the charts, you can see that there's an increase in the repairs slowly. There's not that many properties there, but this 6 that's through only half the year. So we've had a lot of anecdotal discussions with people having problems with their systems as well. So
let's not call it failed, but what if?
Yeah, they're and so the last person they're going to call is me, you know. So it's only when they've got to call me. So because they know that they're looking at a pretty significant expense to repair it if they can. So it's very common that we have to repair it with a very high, you know, cost system, service agreements and so forth. And we do a lot of what we would call reasonable repairs that actually don't meet site criteria or DEQ rule, but we've got to fix their system because they live in the house. We'll do the best we can. So we basically modify conditions outside of the rules that will provide treatment and disposal to the best of our ability and hopefully keep them a functioning system. So we have a number of those some of those that we're working on currently would be considered reasonable repairs.
Do you have many ATT systems up there? Or?
Yes, they're very common. Angus Acres, the part of Angus Acres that is not connected to the community system have ATT systems, most of them.
I know that I've talked to numerous people that live in Terrebonne that are supportive of the county doing something. They, the Walker family that I just talked to, I know that Parker Vernon went door to door to over 100 homes and businesses and talked to people about what is it, what are they going to do. They know they're sitting right on the edge of failure, and they know that, you know, someone needs to look. And, you know, if you went with small systems, you know, they're in a precarious, I know there's a business that's shut down right now because their system is in failure. So people are definitely being impacted at the north end of our county, and you know, I've been listening to them.
So we're the governing body for that area. So it's going to be a leadership, and I'm just communicating with the other commissioners now because it's a leadership of making these decisions. Some existing homeowners with systems that aren't failed are not going to want to have this conversation. Somebody that owns an empty lot is going to want to hear this conversation. A business that's closed is going to yearn for a solution, but it's going to be leadership is the governing body, the Board of Commissioners, stepping up to take a leadership role in really moving something forward or not. You know, I'm just thinking, because the water district tried, but it's not their mission. There's a board for the water district. It's not their mission. There's some small neighborhood development that's happened. They've got approvals for I don't know how many houses at a time on the small cluster system. So there's examples of that there which are working, which is nice. But as I say, we're going to be stepping into the leadership position on this, and we're going to hear, you know, all opinions on it if we do that. And just at the highest level, I want us to think about what we're doing here. You know, feasibility study sounds like 20 years ago there wasn't the concept of when we have the big ATT community systems, or what are those called? The semi-truck ones?
The AX Max.
Max or whatever, yeah, so you can put a whole bunch of homes on this one alternative treatment system. That wasn't even probably thought of being able to be approved in the state of Oregon 20 years ago, or maybe somebody was trying, but now it is available.
They were just creating that system.
Yeah.
Now they've made it to where it can serve large.
So a couple things on the cost. As I read this report, it looked like it was about, back then, $5 or $6 million for the system. There was another $1 million for homeowners, or 500, you know, between 500 and $1 million. Now, so with current rates, you'd be looking at, instead of $5 or $6 million, you'd be looking at $10 million, you think, or is that what?
If you just factored up based on
that
cost index.
So if I do the math and I divide the, you know, 6 million by 600 people, it was only $10,000 per home or lot, plus whatever the person does in a lot themselves, and you're at 18 or 20. That's about a third of what we were quoted in the Southeast Bend neighborhood for what the city would be spending in Bend to put in sewer in our neighborhood. And at $60,000 in Bend, that didn't really make much sense to me, because you could buy 3 ATT systems over the next 50 years or 100, whatever. I mean, you could spend a lot of money to solve the same sewer problem, and so, but this seems so much less. So it'd be a third of what I would kind of remember hearing from the city of Bend, and don't quote me on that. I mean, I'm not exactly right, but it was much different than what we're talking about. Is that realistic that a system up there would be?
I mean, we're just, you know, it's 20 years old, this study, and, you know, I think we've probably exceeded, you know, I mean, we can factor it up using construction cost index, but that doesn't consider different regulations, other factors that have probably need to be dealt with today that may not have been had to be confronted back in 1999. So it does seem on the low end.
Yeah, it does to me. I mean, I know it cost, you know, hammer rock and run. I mean, and I've watched the Southeast Intercept go through, and those costs. The other part is that historically, we have some people from Terrebonne here listening today, and typically it's been federal funding for these big sewer projects. I mean, that was what most entities were. I mean, Bend, I think, relied on that when it had done its big expansions back in the 70s or 80s. Could we ever get to a point where we were set up for federal money? I mean, I still believe there'll be an infrastructure project someday because it's everybody in Washington's interest to give away more deficit financed money. But it's apparently not going to happen while the two parties are arguing and nobody wants each other to look good. But that could, I still think it may happen because it's one of the best $1 trillion projects we could do. So could we ever set up where we're ready for something like that, where we're, I mean, because coming up with 20 million ourselves to do a system for 600 homes seems like a massive amount of.
Yeah, I think that
million, I mean,
an updated feasibility study would have a financial component to it, evaluate what existing programs exist for grant funding, and potentially make it, put it on the shelf, and when there's an opportunity, perhaps it's something that can be pursued. But what was available back in 1999 may or may not be available today in terms of federal funding, state DEQ type funding. So, and then that's the one qualifier I have here. I have no idea.
Then the other thing I thought about, since we do have the two community systems up there, and a couple of people I've talked to since this came up, was, well, rather than trying to solve everybody in Terrebonne's situations, are there places that are worse off than others? Could we ever do a smaller system in an area that would help, that would be better, more bang for our buck in a way, in the sense that there's the people that are happy with their systems, maybe they're in this area, but the ones that aren't are here, and is there a part system that would be a idea or concept?
It would be a fee. I mean, that would be part of this study that would make sense to look into, and it's like clusters. It would be like retrofitting existing residences instead of a new development like what Angus Acres is, but you would be essentially doing something very similar where you still have the tanks. It's a step system, and it pumps to a treatment facility with a nest of treatment units. So it would be something like that they could look at in different parts of the community.
Maybe other options would be part of what the study would be.
So they've already done a study in 82, and then they did one in 99. So now we're presented with a study that would cost $57,000 plus, and with grants and everything, is that too much money for the county to spend? If we could get a $28,000 grant from the state, that would apply.
I can't remember, did you recommend any, Chris, whether any of those might be available?
As far as grant funds
Yes.
to help support the study, I didn't state that in my memo. I would think that, that you do have a proposal in there that staff would want to probably supplement that scope with the thought of looking at these clustered systems that would probably add to that cost, getting a little more granular, almost property by property type look to vet out that feasibility. And then the funding piece, federal funds may not be available for small neighborhood type systems, or as community-wide systems, it may be a different.
No, I was told by the state people that there is funding available.
For the
study.
feasibility study.
Right, at least for the study.
Tom?
Yeah, Commissioners, we looked into that a little bit, and I think Parametrics had forwarded some information on that too. When we were first considering this, it appears that we may qualify for a $20,000 grant from the state to offset the cost of the study. There may also be loans available for the balance. We'd have to research that further. So there is potentially some cost offset for funding the study. As was mentioned, though, it sounds like we'd want to maybe amend the scope perhaps somewhat to take into account the smaller system analysis. So that 57 may or may not be fully accurate given that desire.
Okay. So Commissioner Adair, I know you'd asked some of the proponents to do a
Yes, Parker Vernon went
Parker to do door to door, right? And I know
Yes.
he's here. Do you want to, do you feel comfortable having him kind of report what he did?
Because people were
He is
actually.
so ready. So he had
People
called.
were actually telling me that they actually were asked by Parker, and they were so thrilled, and then they knew I was behind it somehow, but my name wasn't mentioned.
I said, yeah, thanks for your efforts on this. So the
Yes.
kind of community leadership from the areas.
Thanks for having me, first off. This has been something that I've been working on with Patty for about 9 months now, and same with the people from Parametrics, and it's something near and dear to me because I'm the manager of the mobile home park that's right off 97. We have 30 families up there, and we have a septic system that's kind of on its last legs. So this is kind of our last-ditch effort to, well, at least save one of the last bastions of affordable housing up in Terrebonne for those families. But from the petition that I did, because Patty wanted me to go out and try and find people that are in support of the project, I didn't think that it was feasible really to pitch people on the fact that if they can be in support of something that we don't know enough about at this point in time. So I asked them if they would be in support of this feasibility study to see what the cost would be and to see if this is a viable project. Out of the over 100 people that I spoke to, there was 8 people that said they didn't want to see the results of this. I have every single major business and landowner along 97 has signed on to this. Roughly 100 households have signed on to see what this would cost. And going through and talking to people, I spent, 2 weeks ago, I spent 9 hours canvassing, going door to door. I've spent dozens of hours working on this, and hearing the variety of different situations that people are in. There's a lot of issues with septic. There's a lot of septics that are coming up on their failure times. There are septics that are across lot lines that are issues with both residences. There's unutilized property, there's tenants, landowners, residences, business owners that want to see some sort of solution because they realize that this is a major issue. And when it comes down to it being a cost issue, we need to know what it is and what our options are, because overall, when you talk to over 100 people and 8 people say they don't want to see something, you rarely see over a 90% approval rating for something, or at least to see what the information is. And it's an issue throughout. Every single, like I said, every single business owner, from the Thriftway to Base Camp Pizza to the Northwest Storage to the churches that are there, want to see some kind of thing that will help make their community stronger and make their community better and more thriving. And this feasibility study is a step in the right direction.
Okay. So, one question I have, I mean, Tom knows, or have we, as a county, financed any of the sewers in the, I know that some of the resorts have sewer systems, and then there's the one in Water Wonderland, what is it?
Get a board.
Yeah, so did they, have we been the funder of any of those things, or have we just facilitator of any of those sewer systems?
Commissioners, we did fund a sewer feasibility study some years ago for the area south of Sun River, when we were looking at solving some groundwater issues around Deschutes River Rec home sites down and a little bit south of there, in partnership with Sun River Utility at that time to investigate the feasibility of a system there. Obviously, as you know, we've also subsidized the expansion of the Lapine sewer system to serve areas which are now within the city, which weren't at that time. But there's at least 2 examples of assisting either in sewer analysis or sewer development. But beyond that, there really aren't that many sewer systems in rural county, which aren't typically allowed under state law, and we've certainly not been involved in any assistance for any of the destination resorts or any of the other smaller rural developments in terms of wastewater, other than on-site systems.
So just a thought for the moment here, studying cluster systems, exploring small systems, sounds like a scope of work. My point is, 20 years ago, it was talked about connecting to Redmond or doing a lagoon system locally. And just like Chris mentioned, you can take cost estimates and just add 20% or whatever the number is. So, but the value right now may be studying those cluster systems and small systems, as a project by itself even, not updating the 20 years ago numbers, but then we would have a good reference point to these small systems. Just an idea as I'm seeing it.
So I think I'm supportive of some scope of feasibility. I haven't read the report. I got it here. I understand what's been said about it. I guess I'd like to read that and maybe make the decision on Wednesday.
Yeah, there's no reason.
Is that
No need
fine
to
with
really
you
push
to,
anything today,
in terms of, and then that's a good point. I mean, I would at least want to add the cluster systems and smaller systems and any other innovation ideas. Because you start looking at spending $10 million, maybe there's other ways to get more bang for the buck or whatever. And so, maybe we finish for today and then put on the agenda either for Wednesday or next week and
So the only
vote
other-
on the feasibility.
The other thought is governance, as I say. I mean, would this be a new district with its own board, or is that already predetermined? Let's acknowledge that. Or what other governance structures would there be possible?
Wouldn't cluster, so the clusters like the Angus Acres, they probably
They have a
manage their own.
neighborhood association that is the responsible party, and they contract with service providers to.
Yeah, so
There had to be some governance up there to do.
then would we be looking at one, it's like 3 or 4 of those, or one of them to cover 4 systems? It's just an interesting discussion.
They each are individual, so Terrebonne
So far.
Estates, they have their own permit through DEQ, Angus Acres has their own
Okay.
permit through DEQ, and they're separate.
Well, and that gives you guidance for that. Permit from DEQ kind of says, this is going to be the system, this is how many homes are on it, and then this is your permit that authorizes it, and then what's the group that's managing that permit?
So Todd, do you know how many homes are on the Angus one? Or,
I don't off the top of my head.
but they work well, though.
It's
So far.
had some issues, but I think they've gotten it dialed in, and over time, I think the interesting thing is it took a while for it to get fully developed, and that was some growing pains, and we had, the financial downturn that impacted it as well. But I think, from what I understand, that it's doing well now.
Okay, good.
Are you saying that part of the scope of the feasibility would be how is the governance going to, because that's real.
Or, feasibility study is the pipes in the ground, but yeah, there's a governance piece of this. It may not be that document that defines the system, but it's the discussion. It needs to happen, yeah.
Okay. All right. Good. So is that good for today? We'll have some further discussion. Thank you for sharing your information. Are you going to submit that did you get signatures from people?
I got 6 pages of signatures.
Okay, you can give it to us now, or if you're going to go get more signatures, that'd be great, or whatever you want to do.
More, I'll get you more. It's one of those things, when you go through and you talk to everybody, they realize that they're on they have a kind of a ticking time bomb.
Yeah, it's a time bomb.
Yeah, and there's a lot of small lots that if you're up in Terrebonne, that there's no reserve, and if that system goes out, that no longer is a viable home site. And we're also looking at the fact, if you can get sewer in the ground, you can bring online about 300 additional lots that you don't have to annex in from the state that are already there. So those are developable lots that you can bring in, and you don't have to go through the whole process of making the urban areas larger. And it allows for quality development in the area. It brings a lot of value to the area of Terrebonne, mainly because it's a naturally beautiful place. And it allows for also business expansion, and it can just bring a lot more value to Deschutes County. It can increase the tax base, increase the revenue that comes into everybody, and it can really help an area flourish.
Good.
I want to personally thank Parker for taking my suggestion and really doing the right thing, because when you talk about affordable housing, we want to keep our affordable housing, and it would be horrible to lose. And the community of Terrebonne is really a special part of Deschutes County. So I want to thank you. According to our document, it's like 24% of Terrebonne is undeveloped. So
Yeah.
it could bring in significant revenue if we were able to cluster the systems.
And that doesn't include lots where you could split off a lot and increase density and allow for more in the area.
Good. Okay, well, if you want to turn in your signature pages today, that's great. We'll,
Yeah,
we can take a look at those, and then if you want to get more, that's great too, so.
for sure.
Thanks for coming, and looks like you're joined by some other people, so that's good. Chris and Todd and Nick, any other comments by any of you, or we'll go further, we'll think about this. It sounds like we may look at the scope of work a little bit on the feasibility study. We may talk about it at our next meeting or whatever, so good, thanks. Okay, our next item on the agenda is the presentation of the solid waste management plan. Tim will join us, and welcome.
Fire up the.
Oh, you're already set up.
Just me?
Yeah, maybe just stand up. How about, yeah,
Take a short 5-minute break for. Order here.
My name is Tim Shinkby. I'm the Director of the Department of Solid Waste for Deschutes County. We're here today to present the Solid Waste Management Plan to the Board. It's a very large plan with a whole lot of information, and we tried to pare this down to hopefully about a 20-minute presentation. And feel free to ask questions as we go along if you'd like, but recognize this is a real overview. There's a lot of material that we're not able to present in a timely fashion at all. So we also have a couple of members from the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. So if you're interested in hearing their opinion, I'm sure they'd be happy to come up and
Want to
share with
introduce
you.
any of them that are here?
So Jared Black and Mike Riley.
Mike?
I think those are the only two actual members. There's some other interested parties or representatives of SWAC members out there.
Okay, well, we appreciate the members that came today and that participated in this study.
Yes.
It was a great
Yes.
committee and a lot done.
I can hear you.
All right.
So I guess with that, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to Doug, and he's going to walk you through our slides here and tell you what we found.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Drennan with J.R. Miller Associates. We were the lead consultant for production of the plan. So as Tim said, there's a lot of information. We're really doing a high-level overview. As you know, the plan, we did produce an executive summary, which is probably the thing that most people will look at, but also within the plan itself, there's an executive summary. So with that, I'm going to try to move quickly through this. It's your option to interrupt me or save time at the end to ask questions.
So real quick, so this is the final version from the Solid Waste Committee, the Solid Waste SWAC
Yes.
Advisory Committee.
Yes.
To be adopted by the Board of Commissioners when we get to that point, and this is the first step towards that.
Obviously, if there's something in the plan that you don't agree with, there's recommendation on all aspects, we can modify the plan,
Yeah.
before we actually have formal adoption.
So this is the PowerPoint, but the actual plan is this document you've prepared for us. We got this last week, so we're taking a look at that. Okay.
Yeah, and like I said, the executive summary it's a standalone document, but it's also embedded in the overall plan for those who want to get the overview before they dig into the big stuff, so. All right. Well, like I said, this is a very high-level overview. We're going to talk a little bit about the purpose and then go through what's in the plan and what does it say, and then spend a little time on the recommendations, and really, most importantly, the implementation plan. What actions are there to be taken? This is, as Commissioner Tony said, this is a starting point, really not an ending point. So let's start off with the purpose of solid waste plant. You know, Deschutes County, many communities have done these over the years. In fact, I've been involved with 7 or 8 in the state of Oregon. Many because they had to make tough decisions years ago. Deschutes County's had a well-run system for many years, and with the indefinite closure of not landfill, it was time to take a comprehensive look at your solid waste system. So the plan really is comprehensive. It identifies the needs and opportunities, prioritizes actions necessary to continue to provide cost-effective services. And it takes a look at, it's a snapshot, but it looks at 10 to 15 years out. So we'll talk about the goals and principles. You may remember this. We started this process over 18 months ago with this statement, trying to figure out what's the primary goal and the commissioners weighed in. This is a utility, so it serves the businesses and citizens of the county. It's an integrated system that deals with trying to continue to do quality, cost-effective services, but at the same time take the best use of resources and then reduce the waste that is disposed in a landfill. One of the other important things we did at the start of this plan is review the guiding principles. What are the values that are going to dictate this plan? And again, this was reviewed with the commissioners, the board, as well as the Solid Waste Advisory Committee to make sure we represented the values. These are being used as we develop the plan to evaluate options. So it's an integrated system. That means that it links policies, services, and facilities. So it looks at all aspects. It's a key issue is continuing to promote and educate on the methods to reduce waste and reduce the amount generated. That's a statewide goal as well as a national goal. More specifically, it looks at attaining the highest use of the resources, the things that we're throwing away. And item 4 is probably the most important from a standard utility approach. That is, the system needs to be built on sound financial principles, cost-effective services, maintaining rate stability over a long time. And finally, because solid waste is probably one of the most regulated industries, but it's also impacted by economy as well as international economies such as China, it's got to be flexible. It's got to have some adaptability moving forward. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So that's an overview of the beginning of the process. Now, the process is very comprehensive, and it's intended to do that because it's a building block approach. It's an approach built to develop a plan that can be implemented, not one that sits on the shelf. And it started with adopting an advisory committee that you appointed. And this advisory committee is made up, of course, key stakeholders, interested parties, and some citizens at large, some that have particular technical knowledge that was helpful during the plan. It's important to recognize that this committee was a sounding board, but they were also involved with developing the details and developing consensus. So it wasn't a rubber stamp at all. And they worked hard, and they stuck with it, and they're diligent, and they deserve a lot of credit for the effort that they put in. As I said, it's a building block approach. It's a cradle to grave. We really start looking at the system from, examining the current system, then moving on and looking at each element of the system and see, what its current conditions are, what are the opportunities and needs, and then what are the recommendations to make the system better. The public process for this plan was fairly extensive, and I think, went beyond the norm of what we've used in some others. All of the solid waste advisory committees were open to the public. They were advertised. They were promoted. The county set up a website where the information was continually, as it was moved forward, updated and replaced, as well as routine mailings to interested parties that the county started off with at the beginning of the process. We did conduct, in addition to the public meetings, we did 2 specific workshops dealing with waste reduction, recycling, and disposals, and then the added feature of doing some surveys. So we did 2 surveys during the first process of the plan. Then at the end, a survey was conducted by an independent research on the disposal options. So again, this was good in terms of building consensus and getting the direction, but it's important to know that public process, there's still a lot of decisions to be made in formulating some of the actions. So the public process is important as you continue on to the next step. The key issues that we had to deal with, first one was just a few years ago, the state changed their policies for and goals for recycling. So for Deschutes County, it was increased to 45%, and the current recovery is 33%. So there's some work to do there.
When you say recovery rate, so that means what?
Recovery rate is the total amount of waste that or materials that are extracted from the system, either by your recycling programs or even by private businesses, because they report independently, or materials that are used for other purpose but avoid going to the landfill.
So it's like the Schnitzer steel, are they,
yes.
they into the county's
Yes.
recovery rate? So does anybody do 45% recovery rate?
Yeah, in Portland and Marion County, they're about 50 to 52%.
But Marion County burns there.
Yeah, that's not counted though.
I know, but I couldn't believe it when I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they burn it.
Yeah.
And they're having a problem.
Yeah, the energy price went away. So yeah, it includes what's collected in the system, but it also includes what private, Fred Meyers collects bales, cardboard, they report that to the state, and that's counted.
All the county, okay.
The other key issue is considering growth in the population in the county and its impacts. Deschutes County is one of the fastest growing parts of the state, and that's continuing. So the plan needs to address how that growth will be handled. And of course, we looked at methods, looking at how can we extend not landfill? That's the lowest cost alternative for you. Can you extend it? And what are the options for replacing it when that site is closed? Other key issues is looking at proven and reliable technologies that might be applicable that could either create energy or do other things with waste that is discarded. We looked at options that we looked at the long-term reliability of long-term disposal, whether it be here in the county or regionally transported. And of course, a key thing is to look at what investments are going to be necessary over the next 10 to 15 years. And then we also looked at a regional approach in terms of working with Crook County. Is that an option in terms of using their disposal site? So again, I like to show this slide because it demonstrates the comprehensive nature of the plan. On the left side, you see, it really does look at the impacts on generators. They generate waste, and you're responsible for the industry, and you are responsible for doing what's generated. So it looks at that. It looks at collection, recycling, composting, transfer, disposal, and it's always necessary to look at the state hierarchy. By state and federal mandates, it says, reduce waste first. So the plan looks at, through several sections, reducing waste and how can we compost more first, and then are there alternatives to recover waste or recover materials, and then what's left to dispose. So this is important in terms of meeting the state agenda. So that's kind of the overview of the planning process and everything. So what was the summary of the assessment? Well, the landfill is going to close in 10 years. There might be some ways to extend that life, but it's important to take best advantage of the next 10 years to plan the system and develop the system you need. The growth in the economy in Deschutes projects 300,000 tons by 2030, or could be even more. To meet that recycling goal, you would have to recycle an additional 55,000 tons, or a 70% increase in that. So what methods are there to attain that? And the transfer stations, are pretty much are reaching capacity or exceeded their capacity. In the last 5 years, they've grown by 85% of the traffic and volume. And one of the unique features in Deschutes County is the amount of visitors. There's this one county that it's unique. Many places have summer visitors, but Deschutes County has winter and summer, and it's constant. So that has an impact on your waste. So that was addressed in the plan. So what does the plan say? First is there were some findings on the financial administration. The county and the cities work very well together, and the franchise collection companies and through the leadership of the county and DSW, the department, do a good job of maintaining the facilities and the infrastructure. The system is in compliance. There's no major deficiencies. And the rates charged in Deschutes County and the cities is comparable, or in fact lower in some cases, for the level of services. And your $55 a ton is one of the lowest in the states. So those are all favorable conditions. It's important to realize that everybody focuses on that tip fee, $55. But keep in mind the system itself, that's representing only about 25% of the cost. The system, in terms of the recycling, the facilities operations, the collection systems, that's 75% of the business. So when you look at the system, you have to look at it in total. Sometimes you might have to spend money on your side to save money there, and that's an important thing to keep in mind. So what does the plan say? Well, in terms of the expansion and waste reduction services, the distance to the markets creates uncertainty and cost to Deschutes County. So the plan focused a lot on how you can do things here. And one is expanding the multifamily collection. You already have about 85% of your households in the cities that are getting curbside services. Multifamily is a challenge, and expanding that is a key. Focusing on tourism and maybe the food waste programs is another option. Looking at the facilities and the fast growth, it is obvious transfer stations and composting facilities will need to be upgraded and expanded. We identified that. In fact, in looking at your transfer station system, the Negus station, in Redmond, we actually did some preliminary analysis and site plans for that. And that's a high priority to get that facility retrofitted. The Southwest station is a little less in critical need, but within the next 5 years, some investments there will be necessary. And also, since we focus on food waste and getting more food waste into your composting organics processing system, will have to be upgrading. And again, the reason we focused on organics is because you can sustain that operation, and there are markets here, and by adding that food waste to your compost you have now, you're going to actually produce more products that have value here in your county and not depend as much on other places. So within the next 10 years, we looked at the options of long haul versus siting a landfill here, and the recommendation is to site a new in-county landfill. So with that, here are more specific the recommendations. There's 26 recommendations in the plan. Not all of them are going to be moved forward with, but it focuses on actions immediately. I highlight to maintain education and promotion. You already have a good program. The county funds that, the haulers pay into it. The environmental center does a lot of the promotion education. It's very important to maintain that and continue that message. Expanding the best, some of the best value is to expand that program into the multifamily. There is some of that that's happening, but more work has to be done. And it would be nice if we could pick up a multifamily plan and bring it here and say, this is the way to do it. But in reality, every community has different challenges with that. And it's very important that it be designed specifically for you. But as Bend and Redmond are all seeing more dense population, more townhouses, this becomes an opportunity to really just collect more materials that already have markets. Again, we talked about the food waste and organics because the market, yeah.
So what you're saying is in the multifamily facilities, whether it's, you said townhomes, but anything like that, there's less, people are doing less recycling than the typical homeowner. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yes,
essentially?
it's just more difficult.
Yeah.
You know, in some cases, they don't have the facilities aren't there. They don't have a space. And in some cases, they don't have, you know, they have to carry things out. So it's a focus of the state, actually, to how do you get them to participate easier? And, you know, community, like I said, this is a challenge for any community. How does that work? Some of this is already being done. In fact, in the plan, we took a look at it. And in Bend, and I think Redmond, there are actions already taken in their land use zoning laws to provide space, and they work with the haulers to do that. But it's got to go beyond that. It's got to go, you know, how is the structure of the collection service for are the customers paying that in their rate so they don't care? Or is there a way to get the people the tenants to participate more? And more work has got to be done in that. It's got to be maybe an action of a task force to say, here are immediate challenges, and let's design this program for our community. But the point is the collection services are there, the markets for that material, and the system is there to handle it. If we can get more with that, it's a cost-effective way. And then one of the other things that was identified is all the construction demolition waste, which is largely inert, but of course there's wood waste in it, is all going into NOT. And it's important to take a look at some options on how to maybe do something different. The transfer stations, we've talked about upgrading those, and the other major investment is to begin the process to site and have a landfill operational in 10 years. So I'm going to cover, you have a copy of the implementation schedule, and this shows the actions for the next 6 years. And of course, there's 26 things. You can't do everything at once. And some things on this are hinged on having some information before taking action. You'll see there's red and blue lines. The red lines are largely where the county has some authority and takes the lead. And the blue are areas where it's more of a partnership with the cities and the haulers and businesses, and maybe forming a task force and developing or finalizing these. So we have recommendations that apply to all generators, and those first few have to do with maintaining and expanding the promotion education. Those multifamily people need to understand it's one thing to have these facilities there for them to use, but it's also getting them to participate. So expanding and developing a program for that is important. The red line in that first line is the recommendation to complete a waste characterization study. Much of the information we used in this report was from studies done elsewhere. But before you start looking at C&D or construction demolition and some of these things, it's really important to take a snapshot of what your waste stream really is and targeting those programs so that they're designed specifically to get the best results. So I think that's in Tim's budget for this year to begin. We look at single family. Again, there may be some things to get more single families to participate, but the main action to get more recyclables from that is focus on multifamily. We look at multifamily units here, and like I said, that's a program that needs to be developed, and it's a priority. And the Solid Waste Advisory Committee was very anxious to jump into this. Commercial businesses, again, expanding the promotion education there and maybe focusing on tourism areas. And again, there's already education with businesses, but promotion education could be expanded there. We looked at the option of getting more food waste collection from businesses. You see that's delayed, partially because before we turn that on and generate a lot of food waste maybe from the commercial, we want to make sure the compost facilities are there to handle it. So some action should be taken before you start looking more into that. Recommendations with C and D are delayed till the next year until the waste composition study is done and you have more information to say, here are and evaluate the options and target, the best ways to handle that material.
Isn't C&D though really a subset of the overall waste characterization study? I mean, you could really go through the trailers of the C&D people and see what they're delivering, and as opposed to everything everybody else is bringing there, I guess is what I thought I have.
We would target specific generators, specific haulers, looking at that specific waste stream.
Yeah.
To see how much wood is there. Is there cardboard,
roofing, how much
sheet metal? What's available to us?
So there's a lot of studies on this, but not many. I mean, in Deschutes County, most of your C&D is from house building and construction, not so much demolition. So it's important to understand, what those are. You got drywall, you got wood and some other things, but understanding that better before you design a solution is a good idea. The composting facilities, you already have compost facilities available. We look at assessing the markets first. Take a look at these markets. If we produce more organics, where are the markets for sending more what we call a diverse product out? And there's lots of farms, and we can't attain that because most of the compost now is very carbon rich, not nitrogen rich. We add food waste, we're going to get more nitrogen, and there's going to be more opportunities to market that. So looking at the markets and then evaluating the compost facilities, whether it stays at Knott or whether there's a better location, that's something that should be looked at down the road. We talked about the transfer stations. I don't think we need to go over that too much. Certainly, Negus is in need of improvements, and Tim has budgeted to move ahead with the design of that since we did some preliminary work, and that's slated for this year. The Southwest Station is slated for slightly later in 2021. Eventually, some work will have to be done here at Knott, but that probably can be put off until the mid-2020s. Updating the capital program is important so that you can start to make sure you look at your capital needs and determine the best way to finance these investments down the road. Recommendation on alternative technologies. We looked at them. Nothing fits today, but this is there's a lot of emerging technologies, and within every couple of years it's worth taking a look at and seeing if those technologies apply. For the landfill, we looked at all the options, and the recommendation is begin now to develop the process. It's going to take a while to develop that. Looking at your land use procedures, getting a committee, formulating the technical studies that need to be done, and what is the approach for that effort. But then to begin the formal process probably in next year would be desirable. This could take anywhere from 3 to 8 years, or even, depending on appeals. You got a land use action and you got environmental permits. And those are actions that are subject to legal action. So there hasn't been a landfill cited in the state because there hasn't been a need for one, but in a long time. So, but from our experience, it will take some time. And finally, looking at the county administration and financial recommendations, there's no immediate needs. I mean, the system works well. I think Tim has already taken the first action to meet with the cities to upgrade the interlocal agreements. Formulating a task force to tackle some of these issues is a leadership role for the county, but I think there's, from the SWAC and others, there's an opportunity to get a working committee to help design and give you some answers and program direction. And again, revisiting your financial plan, and the next two is to develop a financial strategy for the next 5-7 years to fund these capital investments. So if I was going to give one slide for the summary, this is it. The changes to the system that we're looking at really focus on expanding food waste in the residential. It's already being done on a pilot program successfully, and expanding that food waste collection to residences, single-family residential, is something that will have a value in attaining your goals. Developing the multi-family programs and expanding the recycling to the businesses for recyclables, but also for food waste in the next 3 years. And one of the things that the committee really hammered on was developing this uniform standardized system. There is some uniformity, but it could do better. The more uniform, you got people who live in one community, move to another, and it's all different. So making that a standard program. And again, that's something the task force could take on also. And then developing the alternatives for C&D. So those are the collection programs. In terms of the facilities, upgrading the compost facility in the next 5 years, 3 to 5 years, upgrading the transfer stations, developing solutions for C&D, and then implementing and siting the new landfill.
I have a question about food waste.
Yes.
I know Americans throw an enormous amount of food away. Are you saying that it's going in the regular trash and it needs to be separately thrown away so that we can actually, what do you do with it?
Well, right now, the pilot program is they're putting the food waste in with the yard waste, if they have yard waste. So then that's going to the compost. So that's the program for the residential that is being desired, not a separate. Yes, that's being suggested here, continuing that. Because that way you're not having a special truck or anything else. It's already there. It's just getting households to participate in that. By and large, residential, the programs that in other communities have been very successful because residences do a better job of just throwing away the garbage and the food and not packaging. It's the waste that they normally throw down our garbage. So they're pretty good. You go to a business and you ask a restaurant and those places to do food waste, it gets very contaminated. And as a result, if you take that in with your compost, you better be prepared to do cleanup and processing. That's been the experience. But getting residents to put food waste in with yard waste is a low-cost solution. Does that answer your question?
I guess so. I mean, we're talking about like coffee grounds.
Yeah, coffee grounds, chicken wings.
Well, you can put those into your own garden.
You can.
Yeah, I mean, why would you need to put it in the landfill when you can do your roses with it?
Some people would like to do that.
Yes.
And there's the program and the Environmental Center.
We used to
Mr. Riley talked to.
promote backyard composting. We
Right.
would sell, composters.
The little bag.
Yeah, the little
Yes.
black thing. We find most people would just sort of let us do the composting, I guess. So
Buy the compost from you.
and there is technologies, anaerobic digesters, where you could do that in a vessel to extract energy. It's another waste to energy type approach that we did look at as well, but those are all very expensive, and our waste flow, it tends to be relatively small. So that's another one of those technologies I think that could very well be employed here in Deschutes County at some point in the future, but just not today. So we'll constantly watch those technologies develop, and at some point, hopefully, we'll say the time is right for us to embrace them.
So in the plan, you'll see there's some discussion of how much food waste is thrown away, both residential and commercial. And if we can get, I think we thought if we can get half of that, that plus the C&D could get you well close to your 45% recycling. So, and like I said, what it does is it opens the opportunity Right now, your compost is deficient in that nutrient value, and therefore there's limited market. It's mostly a ground cover type material, but you put that nutrient in there, now you're getting material that farmers and others will want to use. And we visited a facility that is doing that, so.
Where was that, here in the state, or?
It's in.
Across the river in Washington.
But they handle the dowels. They do all the dowels.
In the Dalles, but it's just across the river.
They just do it over there.
Sport.
Yeah. Yeah, it's called Dirt Huggers is the name of them.
Yeah. I also like to point out that, we do have a 45% diversion goal, that's set, by the state. But there's huge advantages to us to divert as much as we can from the landfill. We want to meet that goal, but we know that every ton that we keep out of the landfill means the landfill can last a little longer. Even after the landfill is closed, every ton that we can divert is tons that we don't have to transport to a new landfill. So increased diversion is going to pay off in spades here, especially once we move to a new disposal site, because transportation costs are really going to be the big ticket item.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's what we have for you. Would you, I guess I would ask if Mike or you would like to come up and make a statement? What did you think of the process? Where did we go wrong?
Now you can really let them have it.
A couple hours.
Time.
I have, it was a very detailed program and a lot of overview. Do what?
Say your name.
Okay, I have to think about that a minute. Jared Black, I live in Bend. One of the things that came up in your budget meeting was that they did not consider privatizing the solid waste system. I think Jackson County is private, so there are some private, and we didn't consider that option. Another option was, it's quite expensive to live in Bend, and I asked the city how many residential buildings there are in Bend, and they didn't really know, but they said it's about 35,000. And our disposal costs about $10 a month higher than in some towns in Arkansas, Rogers, Arkansas, in Owasso, Oklahoma, and in a place I lived for a while in Texas. And that $10 a month difference here takes about $4 million out of Bend every year. And say in 10 years, you're spending $40 million additional over what many other places pay. And we didn't really seem to address that. I think it may be the state rules, but even maybe we could ask the state to kind of relax some of that stuff. So that's my 2 points. We didn't consider privatizing like Mike Myers did in the budget meeting, and we're kind of expensive here, and a lot of people, it's a tough place to live. That's all I have.
Thanks, Mike Riley. I'm Executive Director at the Environmental Center and was one of the SWAC members. I believe we have some of the lower disposal rates in the state right at this point. So while it may be true that we're more expensive than some places, I think in our particular part of the country we're doing pretty well from a cost perspective. We had a good process. I thought we had good public engagement. It's a solid waste management plan, so you didn't get people too excited about it. I mean, honestly, I think where we may get some more excitement is when we get to if we're going to pursue the siting question. That's where we're likely to have conflict, is over specific locations if there is disagreement about it. But so far there seems to be broad community support for actively pursuing, looking hard at that question and seeing if we can really make it happen here locally. And we support that as an organization. We think it's the best choice and the most environmentally responsible choice. And it looks like it's probably the best choice for us as well financially, so we've kind of a win-win there. I think we came up with a good plan. I think we have an outline. There's a lot of work still to be done on sort of investigating the specific parts of it, and we look forward to being part of that, whether it's the construction demolition or the food waste stuff. There's still a lot of work to do, but this is a really good foundation to kind of set the direction and trajectory for the system as a whole, and we were happy to be part of it and pleased to continue to partner with the county on achieving some of the goals set out in the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
One question I have about the food waste thing is it's, just watching what I just see, it seems like homes probably have less food waste than restaurants do, just because restaurants serve so much compared to what families tend to, most families don't serve twice as much as people eat or whatever. Is that true? And then the second is, have you ever looked, half of what the weight of food waste is actually water. So just drying it would make it take up less space, in a way, as opposed to putting it in landfills. So I just was wondering,
Well, I'll have to dig into my own plan to give you the answer to that.
is it, well, if it's in the book, I'll find it. That was just something I was curious about.
Well, we
because
did
it-
look at both residential, commercial, but again, we're using data from state, from other communities, and that's really part of why we suggest looking at. I suspect, this is from my expertise of looking at other communities, you're gonna find a much higher food waste percentage in your commercial industrial because of the visitors, just the percentage of restaurants and business. I just think you're gonna see a higher percentage there. And so that's something we'll find out. In terms of the residential, we're working off the data that they provided. I can't remember the numbers to my head, but it's more than you would think. It's really more than you would think. But
Seems like so much of what we throw away is packaging, just all kinds of packaging.
Well, yeah, and so you do get a lot of the package from the commercial industrial. The communities that have moved into doing commercial industrial waste collection, food waste collection, have found that composting that is not easy. So many of them are using digester systems, or the ones that are really, and I'll point to British Columbia, Vancouver, British Columbia, they got an aggressive business recycling, and the compost people up there will not take it. They say, you bring it to us after you go through and you process it. But I talked to them, and I talked to Engineer Compost Systems that does a lot of stuff in Seattle, and they say they have no problem with the residential. They can handle it. There's a little bit of packaging, and Brad Bailey, at his compost, he says he hasn't had any major problems with the residential from the pilot programs. So that's been the experience, that's an easier target. When you start doing the commercial, there's a lot more education, there's a lot more, and you may have to invoke some additional processing. That's why we suggest tread in that lightly. Go after the easy stuff first.
I live in the community where they don't pick up your recycling. You have to actually drop it off. So, I don't know how big of an area that impacts in the county, but I'm always driving through the transfer station because it built up, and I can understand when you're talking about like multifamily dwellings, where do you keep it? We have the special corner in the garage, and then my husband yells at me, and I go and recycle it all.
Somebody's gotta do it.
Yeah, somebody has to do it. He had to do it once. So anyway, yeah, but I can see that it's so important to recycle and to keep that number, up to the 50%.
Yeah, multifamilies are really tough. Cities are working on it across the country.
Yeah.
Because, again, you got a transient, they get educated, then they move.
Right. And they don't really, and it takes room.
Yeah, it takes room. There are ways to make it easier, but then there's still the promotion education that has to go with it.
So, yeah. Did you have a question back there?
I just want to add, so I'm Kristen Steiner with Ben Garbage and Recycling and High Country Disposal. We do offer commercial food waste here in Bend, and I think you're right, there are far more residents, so that volume does increase if we're comparing food waste for residential versus commercial, but restaurants are big contributors and will increase the volume of diversion from the landfill as more and more commercial businesses sign up. But yeah, plastics and packaging are a concern, and we definitely are weary of plastics in our compost.
Yeah.
And then just to kind of clarify another yeah, you can throw your coffee grounds in your backyard, but maybe not your. You can do vegetative, but yeah, you can't do any of your meat and stuff like that. And we're gonna open that up to meat products too. We can process that already.
Well, good. Well, I think we need to move on, so we appreciate you all coming today and giving us this presentation. We'll, like I said, we're going to take a look at the actual binder and the whole plan. Probably have a discussion on it next Monday at our work session, and then if we have any questions, maybe call you back for that. But we'll figure that out and move forward.
Great.
So.
Well, I just wanted to end with, I've been in this consulting business 40 years, and it was a pleasure having the opportunity to be part of this. And I think you got a good roadmap here, and it's kind of a handoff. And
There we
Yeah,
go.
good. Well, thanks for your help on this. We met early on in the process, and appreciate all your insight. And it's good to have somebody that's worked with so many other systems. So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Tim.
So our next item today then is the consideration of ordinance number 2019-01. Oh, no, that's wrong.
Oh, no.
Sorry, that's it. We've already finished that.
That was yesterday, or
Though the Deschutes County Justice Reinvestment Grant application for the 1921 biennium.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ken Hales for the Department of Community Justice. In the room with me is Manager Holcomb and Analyst Stevens, in case you have questions I can't answer, and District Attorney Hummel and Chief Deputy Mary Anderson, in case you have questions specific to their component of this. This will be the fourth biennial application for the Justice Reinvestment Grant. This application is unlike the three prior applications because there are two components to it. One component is the traditional formula grant program, and the second component is the supplemental program. The regular formula grant program is what we've had applied for in the prior three bienniums. It will provide approximately $178,000 for victim service providers in the community over the 2-year period, and approximately $1.6 million to the department for supervision and services provided or purchased to the Justice Reinvestment target population. I won't go into detail with that because the number of employees financed through this and the scope and type of services are the same as in prior years, except we're spending $40,000 for some IT development, performance management dashboards. But for the most part, it's the same thing you've seen in prior grants. This biennium, we have the supplemental program, and this is a competitive application. It's not driven by our formula. It is competitive, and it is narrowly focused on reducing prison utilization by increasing the number of offenders that receive discretionary departure sentences or downward departure sentences. And just to elaborate, there's a set of felony crimes that are presumptive prison sentences. However, if appropriate consideration is given, the court could put those persons on probation, and that's the target of this grant. Now, we do that now outside our office, but we don't do it as well as we believe we can through the supplemental grant program. With this application, we seek about $562,000, $51,000 of which, in addition to that, $51,000 is made available to crime victims. With this money, we will seek to finance one position in the sheriff's office that will be the pretrial officer who will have two functions. One is to do the safe screens to determine which inmates are eligible for a departure sentence, and after district attorney office review, we'll do the defendant assessment report, which will identify of those eligible which are good candidates for a departure sentence. Also key to this is designating and hiring one specific assistant district attorney that would do the considerations for all those departure opportunities instead of multiple assistant DAs with multiple different criterias in their mind. We'll be able to standardize that and make it more routine and consistent through utilizing one person. This particular assistant district attorney will also stay assigned to those cases in case those cases have to go before court, either pre-trial or post-sentence, with the intent of seeing how we can keep this person in the community or give a good cause why they should not be in the community. This is a 2-year grant. This money will cover 18 months because we don't plan to get it up and running until January. I'm very excited about the plan. It's very highly collaborative with the district attorney's office, sheriff's office, our department. We believe, if effective, continued funding will be forthcoming. This is the second year of the supplemental grants. If we're effective at keeping even a handful of offenders, more offenders out of prison, it makes a big difference for a county our size on our trend line. So we feel pretty good about subsequent funding. I also want to thank you for taking.
What do you mean by that? It makes a big difference if you keep a handful out. Big difference in what?
Because the number of offenders we send to prison are dramatically less than a very large county, that if we can just defer a few extra guys, it makes a significant difference on our trend line. The state actually monitors prison utilization, and I don't know the exact math, but for each, if I get sentenced to prison for 2 years, that's 24 months they add into that goes into the projection. So if you can just trim 2, 3, 4 offenders off of that annually, it makes a big impact because we don't have that many offenders compared to the big communities.
But I'm asking, I guess, what's it make a big impact on?
It makes a big impact on our trend line. To receive the justice reinvestment monies, we have to show improvement by less prison utilization. And
at the state prison?
At the state prison. And that line goes up and down depending on our utilization. We've been doing really good the last biennium with it being below, but this will also help us ensure that we even more assured at keeping it below the baseline, so to speak.
So it's kind of, sounds like it's a feedback loop for qualifying for these grant funds.
And also the way this works is if we get a handful of offenders more in our census, in the next biennium, the community corrections grant pays for those offenders' supervision. So it just kind of layers in like that. There's really no downside to this grant. If it's effective, we feel good about continued funding. It doesn't cost the county anything. A couple new positions, one for the DA's office, one for the sheriff's office. The Community Justice Department will not receive any additional positions, but the work that the pretrial release officer does will relieve us of about a half FTE devoted to these other things. So it's highly collaborative. It's a win-win all around for us. I don't see any downside to it. And I would recommend you approve submittal of the grant.
I do have a question. On page 4 of 15, have any of the programs included in the application received a corrections program checklist review? And under new priorities, it says you did not pass. What do you know what that meant?
Yes. State law requires that we use these funds when we purchase services on providers that provide those services consistent with evidence-based practices. Previously, our primary service provider for drug and alcohol services did not pass. And then subsequent to failing the correctional program checklist, Analyst Stevens and other staff provide technical assistance to that provider to bring their performance up. And I was very pleased that next time they were reviewed, they passed and did very well. That has two values for us. One, it reassures us that they're doing it right, and two, it allows us to spend state money on that purpose. New priorities failed, and I think this was their first evaluation? Yeah. Trevor, you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Trevor Stevens from Parole and Probation. And so New Priorities actually just had their first evaluation most organizations that are evaluated with this process, they usually fail that first evaluation, and so we're working with them on an action plan to get that level up to passing. So it's pretty common for a provider to fail that first time through. Our other provider, Pfeiffer & Associates, is the provider that we worked with over a year process, and we got them up to passing standards, and they're actually doing really well right now. So,
I saw that one passed. Great. And then my other question is, okay, so 10% of the funds, do they, both of these funds, the supplemental and the formula, both will go to CASA Kids Center and Mary's Place? They'll both go to those same three?
Yes.
Okay.
that's a requirement of the grant itself. So
Right.
the supplemental, the money has to go to those original organizations in our formula grant. So they dictate that in that application.
Okay. I just was curious. Thank you.
So talking about a couple FTE, is this grant limited type positions, or is this, has this been scheduled in at all in our annual budget currently?
I do not believe, I'm confident it has not been scheduled into the current budgets. Development of the supplemental grant, we pursued after getting the grant application, and we're aware of its availability, and now we'd have to go.
So yeah, by doing this application, we're looking at, success means adding a few FTE into our budget.
Yeah, Commissioners, similar to the grant we discussed earlier, if it was awarded, we would have to come back with a budget adjustment to add to the position. Since this is and we'd make the determination on whether the positions to be hired were of limited duration or not, given that they're grant funding and the likelihood of the funding continuing into the next biennium beyond that. But that would be a question that we would answer as part of that process.
Great, thank you.
Did you say how much competition there is for this, or?
I do not know what other
Think the
counties are
supplemental
applying
one.
for the supplemental grant. Trevor has been in close communication with the Criminal Justice Commission. We feel pretty good about our chances of getting it.
What, I had a couple questions on the, I don't know who wrote what, but there's the grant application summary under the supplemental JRA, there's some problem statements, and I just was curious, did we write those, okay, so you say the jail's operating near capacity at a population level that threatens a manageable and safe jail milieu. I thought we still had some capacity. I mean, I know the sheriff's told us there's been days when he has, I don't know, it's 300 is but I can't, so tell me a little more about that when you say at capacity.
So the sheriff's office collaborated with us on this, and so right now their average daily population has been operating at that 300 point, and they said any point over the 280 point gets them to where it just puts some staffing constraints on those individuals, and so that's what the information was provided for us from the sheriff's office.
But the actual capacity isn't it close to 400 or something, or?
I'm not sure.
Really? 440 is actually.
Yeah, it's kind of obscure, but it's the number of offenders, the type of offenders classified, how many of them are mental health, female, so it's a number of dynamics going to.
Yeah, and he's explained, I remember him talking about that, you can't have certain mixes together, right. So that's, and then at this time, we don't have any pretrial program to safely manage.
That is correct. This is a new initiative for us. This pretrial release officer, in addition to the evaluations, would be identifying persons that are eligible for the program that can come out of jail pretrial, would provide a level of oversight of that person in pretrial status, and assign services if that's necessary for this person on pretrial status.
But there's not a program, but you do make those decisions. I mean, the DA's office don't you make those decisions about, well, this person doesn't really need to stay in jail? I mean, it may not be a program.
Those decisions are made. There is a court release officer that helps make these decisions, but with the addition of a deputy to provide oversight, we believe we can expand the numbers that would be suitable for pretrial release.
Okay. Any further questions? It'll be interesting to see. It was interesting to read the whole application, and I guess that's what this is that we're looking at with all the details, yeah. So do we have support for this application? Yes.
I move we support the grant application for the Deschutes County Justice Reinvestment for the 19 to 21 biennium.
And I'll second it.
Any further discussions? Thanks for bringing this forward and explaining it all to us today. So it'll be interesting to, hopefully we'll hear back when's this due? Or I think it's in here.
It's due the 28th of August, and then we will know something around October, November is when we'll know if we get the supplemental funds.
Does that give you enough time to hire somebody by January 1st?
It'll be a tight timeline, but yeah, so.
Okay.
Commissioner Adair?
Yes.
Commissioner DeBonne?
Yes.
And Chair votes yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Ken.
All right, so this might be a good time to recess. That concludes all of our active things. We have commissioner updates, other items. We have several executive items.
Well, we have one for sure from James in the property, and possibly one under the labor if you want to visit where we are with the sheriff.
Okay. Well, I'd kind of like to get lunch. How about everybody else?
I agree.
Why would we want lunch?
Well, you might not.
One more statement here.
Chair Henderson,
Oh, yes.
I forgot a component of the request is also to give the chair permission to sign a letter of support, which is requested by the state in our application.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
I'll move, chair's signature on a letter of support for this application.
I'll second it.
Okay. Commissioner Bone?
Yes.
Commissioner Dare?
Yes.
And Chair votes yes. Thank you. Yep, no
There
problem.
you go. Now it's official.
You got the details in it. Yeah, thanks. Okay, well, it's 1, 2?
I
that right?
have something to go to at 3:30.
The property one